Thoughts Beneath the Helmet by PinkBunnyChan077. Summary. Djarin grapples with the weight of the Darksaber now in his possession, and the unresolved conflict it brings with Bo-Katan. Seeking redemption, he embarks on a journey to Mandalore, only to find Bo-Katan a solitary figure, abandoned by her forces. As their paths converge once more, Din confronts the complexities of their relationship, or Djarin's point of view towards Bo-Katan throughout the entire Season 3 arc. Chapter 1. Meeting her on Kalevala. When Din first encountered Bo-Katan on Trask, he held no particular interest in her or her objectives. He recognized that she diverged from the strict Mandalorian creed he fervently upheld, and he saw no value in her quest to reclaim Mandalore or her pursuit of the Darksaber. His sole focus remained on returning Grogu to his own kind. Having achieved that, he found himself adrift in the expansive galaxy, feeling disconnected and purposeless. The Darksaber, an object of little significance to him initially, now weighed heavily in his possession. Nights were spent in contemplation, pondering its implications and his role in wielding it. He couldn't comprehend why Bo-Katan hadn't challenged him for it. If she desired it so strongly, why not engage in honorable combat for its ownership? He acknowledged her superior combat prowess, and would willingly offer a fair contest. Her devastation upon seeing him with the saber mirrored his own confusion. She had claimed it belonged to her, yet made no attempt to take it. The lingering questions about Bo-Katan haunted him. What was she doing now, and what had become of her ambitions? He couldn't shake his curiosity about her fate, nor the nagging feeling that his actions had unwittingly obstructed her goals. Despite his indifference towards her cause, he found himself drawn to understanding her motivations and the consequences of their encounter. After parting ways following Luke Skywalker's intervention and Grogu's departure, Din never received word from Bo-Katan again. The thought of seeking her out to return the Darksaber crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it as a futile endeavor. Through their brief interactions, he had come to understand her as a resolute woman with unwavering determination. What she deemed necessary was non-negotiable, a trait he both admired and found exasperating. The presence of the Darksaber weighed heavily on Din's mind, a constant reminder of Bo-Katan and their unresolved conflict. Its presence denied him the peace he sought, akin to the shifter ball from his razor crest, a poignant reminder of Grogu's absence. Hence, upon reuniting with Grogu, Din's primary objective became finding Bo-Katan and making amends not only to his covert, but also to her. Recalling her invitation to join her in reclaiming Mandalore, he pondered how he might assist her. Despite his certainty that she wanted nothing to do with him, he felt compelled to assuage his guilt and address the concern stemming from their dilemma. Aware of the armorer's cautionary words about Bo-Katan, Din recognized her as a potential source of trouble, yet he realized that it was his own ignorance that had troubled her, and he was determined to rectify the situation. As Dinsen One touched down at Bo-Katan's castle on Kalevala, he sensed an eerie quietness and somber atmosphere enveloping the palace. Apart from the droid that greeted him, there was no sign of Bo-Katan's night owls. Entering the imposing structure, Din's footsteps echoed in the empty halls, leading him to the grand throne room where Bo-Katan sat, a solitary figure amidst the vastness of the chamber. Her posture exuded a sense of detachment, her gaze fixed upon the distant horizon visible through the towering windows. Din approached cautiously. "Bo-Katan, it's Djarin," he announced, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Recalling their last encounter aboard Moff Gideon's light cruiser, where she had inquired about his name, he felt a strange sense of openness towards her. Despite his reluctance to reveal his identity to others he barely trusted, he now found himself unburdened by the thought of her knowing who he was. Deep down, he suspected that this meeting wouldn't be their last anyway. "I'm here to join you," Din declared, halting before her throne. "There's nothing left to join," she replied, her tone devoid of life, mirroring the emptiness in her green eyes. As she explained how her forces had deserted her upon her failure to reclaim the Darksaber, Din realized that Bo-Katan was now utterly alone. During their 2 years apart, she had been stranded here, much like him, with nowhere to go and no one to be. At least Grogu had returned to him, had chosen him. But for Bo-Katan, there was no one. No one had chosen her, and it seemed unlikely that anyone would until she possessed a mere blade. He remembered she was the last of her family line. No family. No friends. She has a home, a place to be, but she must be terribly lonely. And it was all because he hadn't known any better. He anticipated Bo-Katan challenging him for the Darksaber, but she remained silent. She could have pursued him across the galaxy to reclaim it, yet she didn't. He had acquired it by defeating Gideon without killing him. So why the reluctance on her part? What was holding her back? She even hinted at him leading her people, their people, as though her warriors would willingly follow a Mandalorian foundling, labeled by some as a child of the Watch and a zealot. It seemed like a recipe for discord. Din had no desire to lead anyone, let alone an entire planet. It was her ambition, not his. And considering what the armorer had warned him about her, perhaps it wasn't just a desire for power. It might have been a deep-seated need driving her. So why wouldn't she simply take the Darksaber from him and end both their torment? Her actions or lack thereof spoke volumes. She seemed content to remain ensconced in her throne, brooding over what transpired, rather than taking decisive action to reclaim her weapon. Din couldn't fathom this woman from the very first moment they met until now, no matter how hard he tried. What's evident to Din, though, is that Bo-Katan wants no involvement with him whatsoever. Nevertheless, almost inexplicably, he found himself informing her of his intention to journey to Mandalore to seek redemption, as if she needed to be privy to his plans or she had any interest in his whereabouts for the next 24 hours. Despite her obvious disdain for him and her skepticism towards his plan to go to Mandalore, she still was kind enough to provide him crucial information about the location of the living waters, simplifying his task. For that, he felt genuinely grateful. After expressing his gratitude, she simply bid him farewell with a tone that unmistakably conveyed her desire to never see him again. It seemed she hoped to avoid any future encounters with him. If that was truly her wish, then she should take the saber from him. For as long as he possessed it, their paths would inevitably intersect. At least, that's what Din believed. For now, if solitude was what she sought, then solitude she would have. Yet, as he contemplated his journey towards redemption, Din couldn't shake the feeling that the Force would eventually compel him to return the Darksaber to Bo-Katan. He held on to the hope that doing so would bring closure to their tumultuous connection, allowing them to move forward separately towards their own goals in this vast galaxy. Perhaps then, he mused, he could finally rid himself of her lingering presence in his thoughts. Chapter 2. Rescue in Mandalore. Summary. Din's POV as Bo-Katan rescued him in Episode 2, The Mines of Mandalore. Din sighed heavily in frustration as his body grew increasingly numb within the confines of the metal trap. What sinister intentions lay behind the gaze of this half-droid, half-monster hybrid? Nobody knew. But one thing was certain. It wouldn't bode well. Amidst his own struggle for survival, Din's thoughts were consumed by concern for Grogu. Had the kid emerged unscathed from the caves? Had he safely returned to the N1? Would he remember the coordinates to instruct R5? What if he became lost? Yet, in this moment of helplessness, all Din could do was cling to hope that Grogu had absorbed his teachings. Despite the strength of his Force abilities, Grogu remained a vulnerable child prone to fear. But Din placed his trust in his son, believing that he would summon the courage needed to save him. Bo-Katan stood as his sole hope, whether she liked it or not. Despite his reluctance to impose further on her, sensing her lingering resentment toward him, he resolved to give her space for the time being. Unfortunately, he couldn't identify another soul who possessed the intimate knowledge of this place like she did. Although he harbored no illusions about her concern for his well-being, he remained confident in her ability to aid him. Not out of any personal regard for him, of that he was certain. What significance did he hold in her life anyway? Merely the man who inadvertently shattered her hard-earned accomplishments. Why should she care if he met his end here and now, a victim of his own recklessness? Yet Din was certain of Bo-Katan's care for Grogu. He firmly believed she wouldn't turn his son away. Recollections of her concern when he informed her of Grogu's abduction came to his mind. Instead of dismissing the matter as irrelevant to her, Grogu was none of her business after all. She immediately inquired about the perpetrator, her distress palpable upon learning it was Moff Gideon. Din sensed the weight of her understanding of the challenge ahead in rescuing Grogu from such an evil figure. Acknowledging Bo-Katan's underlying motives in aiding him against Moff Gideon, Din remained steadfast in his belief that Grogu held a significant place in her priorities somehow. Despite her disappointment, she didn't storm off the cruiser upon witnessing him wield the saber she sought. Instead, she stayed, ensuring the safety of Grogu until all threats had been neutralized. Din couldn't shake the guilt of benefiting from their agreement, while Bo-Katan did not. Yet she refrained from berating him or assigning blame for his naivety. Instead, she offered a simple apology for Grogu's separation from him, granting him the space he needed to process the loss. Understanding his emotional state, she respected his need for solitude, even though she desired the dark saber fervently. Yes, Bo-Katan possessed a sharp edge and could be brusque and self-interested, yet beneath her tough exterior lay a heart that was never devoid of care. Din held firm to this belief, sensing her underlying compassion despite her sometimes harsh demeanor. It was evident in her actions, a truth he could discern in her character. As anticipated, she arrived to offer aid when he needed it most. The sound of her blasters firing at his captor echoed, which reminded him of the day they first crossed paths on Trask, when she had rescued him from peril as well. It seemed he had a knack for finding himself in need of her assistance, often trapped in metal cages. Despite any reservations, Din harbored no doubt that Bo-Katan would come to his aid. Even when confronted with his accusations on Trask about her Mandalorian lineage, she didn't hesitate to rescue him for a second time. Struggling to keep his eyes open, Din weakly turned his head towards Bo-Katan, witnessing her being electrocuted by the creature. She was in pain, and a pang of guilt shot through him. He longed to assist her, yet his own predicament demanded her immediate attention. All he could do was hope that Bo-Katan would emerge victorious against his captor. He felt utterly powerless, a sensation that seemed all too familiar in her presence. Why did he always seem so feeble when she was around? Amidst the chaos, the ringing of the dark saber pierced the air, drawing Din's attention. He watched as Bo-Katan effortlessly wielded it, as though it were a natural extension of herself. In contrast to his own struggles with the weapon, she exhibited mastery and grace. There was no denying it. The dark saber belonged to her, both in skill and in spirit. After thrusting the dark saber through the creature's chest, Bo-Katan approached Din, checking on his condition with a gentleness that caught him off guard. Her use of his first name felt strange. No one had addressed him in such a familiar manner since his parents. "Din, are you okay? Can you hear me?" she asked softly, her voice a stark contrast to her usual snarky attitude. It was the first time he had heard her speak with such tenderness. Could it be that she was genuinely concerned for him? "It's Bo-Katan. I'm gonna get you out of here, all right?" she continued, her tone soothing and caring, a far cry from their interactions on her throne at Kalevala. Her reassurance brought him a fleeting sense of relief, though it was short-lived, as he noticed the creature activating a larger mech behind Bo-Katan. A sense of urgency flooded him. She seemed unaware of the imminent threat looming behind her. Instinctively, he attempted to warn her, but his body refused to obey him. His strength to speak had deserted him, leaving him feeling utterly helpless. Bo-Katan seemed to catch on to his attempts to communicate. "Dan, I can't hear you. Are you trying to say something?" she inquired, her concern evident in her voice. Summoning every ounce of strength he possessed, Din managed to croak out the words, just as he saw the creature closing in on her, poised to strike. "Behind you," he rasped, his warning coming just in time for Bo-Katan to evade the creature's attack. Once again, he bore witness to her remarkable skill and control as she wielded the dark saber. Despite the creature's use of larger, heavier machinery, it stood no chance against Bo-Katan and the saber. With the creature defeated and Bo-Katan ensuring its demise, she approached Din once more. As his vision gradually blurred, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The worries that had plagued his mind about his own safety and that of Grogu faded away. He knew he was safe now, as was his son. With Bo-Katan by his side, he could finally close his eyes in peace, knowing that no harm would befall him. Chapter 3. Cooking Soup. Summary. Din's POV continuation for Episode 2-2. Mines of Mandalore. Din woke up to Grogu and Bo-Katan sitting by the fire, and Bo-Katan seems to be cooking something. Din jolted awake, only to find himself accompanied by both Bo-Katan and Grogu, instantly calming his nerves as he realized the danger had passed. What happened? He inquired, seeking clarification on the events that unfolded while he was unconscious. However, rather than addressing his specific query, Bo-Katan's response served as both an obvious answer and a pointed reminder of her lingering frustration with him. "I saved your life," she retorted tersely. Sensing Bo-Katan's dwindling patience, Din refrained from pressing the issue further. He knew she had no desire to be there, let alone be associated with him again. Instead, he chose not to inquire about what he had initially intended to ask. "How did you find me?" he wondered aloud. "Your kid," she replied. Her tone softened with a hint of warmth. "He's tougher than he looks." A sense of pride washed over Din as he glanced at Grogu, who stood nearby watching Bo-Katan prepare something in a metal cup, likely soup. Grogu's fascination with watching food being cooked was a familiar sight. Of course, food is enough to keep his son occupied. "He's quite the navigator," Bo continued, her voice filled with evident fondness. Din couldn't help but smile at the praise for his son, reassured that Grogu remembered everything he had taught him on their journey. "Thank you for rescuing me," Din expressed his gratitude, noticing Bo-Katan's fleeting side glance before she averted her gaze and focused on stirring the contents of her metallic cup. Though she remained silent, Din felt compelled to break the tension with conversation, acknowledging her earlier truthfulness about Mandalore when they first met on Trask. "You were right, Mandalore is not cursed," he admitted, despite the conflicting sentiments she had expressed during their encounter on Kalevala. "Was I?" She remained unconvinced, her tone reflecting doubt as she gestured towards their bleak surroundings. "Look around. There's nothing left." Her words resonated with Din as he surveyed the desolation that still plagued Mandalore. Despite the absence of poisoning, the planet remained inhospitable, ravaged by formidable creatures and devoid of vegetation to provide enough sustenance. "A great society is now a memory," she continued, her voice tinged with indifference, yet betraying a hint of underlying pain that Din could discern. "I used to rule here for a brief time. Now it's destroyed. Nothing to cling to but ashes." With a solemn air, she rose and handed him the concoction she had been stirring. So, she had been cooking for him? Din initially assumed it was for Grogu, imagining the little one might have pestered Bo-Katan for food, prompting her to build a fire and prepare a meal. However, a warmth filled him as he considered the possibility that Bo-Katan had taken the time to prepare food for him, despite the option to simply wait for him to wake up, escort him back to her ship, and swiftly send him on his way to his starship in Kalevala to rid herself of his presence. Bo-Katan did something Din never expected. It wasn't something she necessarily needed to do for him. She could have even left him and Grogu once he regained consciousness, dispatching his N1 to Mandalore via R5. Yet, she had made the effort to cook for him. This simple act confirmed Din's belief about Bo-Katan. While she often appeared indifferent, she wasn't devoid of care, even towards someone like him whom she seemingly disliked to such an extent that she couldn't bear to be in the same room. Din accepted the cup gratefully, cautiously inspecting its contents. His eyebrows furrowed in confusion as the soup looked and smelled unfamiliar. "What is this?" he inquired, wondering what Bo-Katan was attempting to feed him. Was this her way of exacting revenge for having to come all this way for him? "You've never eaten pug soup?" Bo-Katan's tone held a hint of disbelief, as if Din should have been familiar with it. "No," Din admitted truthfully, a tinge of embarrassment coloring his expression as he glanced up at her. She smirked in amusement, her eyes rolling at his cluelessness. "Can you appreciate the irony?" she mused, turning away to gather her belongings. Din lifted his helmet to his mouth, cautiously taking a sip of the soup. To his surprise, it was delicious, unlike anything he had tasted before. Every Mandalorian worth their armor is raised on this, since they were his size, Bo-Katan explained, casting a glance at Grogu, who was sipping the remaining soup from the cup. This soup was a Mandalorian delicacy? How had he not known that? Did no one in his covert know about it? He had never seen anyone in his tribe cook something like this. As Din felt his strength gradually returning, he slowly rose to his feet. Thoughts of his covert reminded him of his original purpose for being there. You should rest. I'll get you back to my ship soon enough, Bo-Katan advised. But Din ignored her suggestion, focusing on gathering himself and lifting Grogu onto his pram. Rest. He never imagined she'd want to spend another hour in here with him, let alone offer a ride back to Kalevala. But now wasn't the time to dwell on that. He had to focus on what he came there to do in the first place. I'm not going with you, Din declared firmly, prompting a look of disbelief from Bo-Katan. What are you talking about? I must continue to the mines of Mandalore, so that I may be redeemed, he explained, determined to adhere to his mission. Din began to gather his weapons, neatly laid out by Bo-Katan on a nearby stone. He wasn't surprised to see the darksaber among his belongings. He knew she wasn't an opportunist, seizing the ancient weapon from him in his dire situation. Despite the obvious fact that she was the darksaber's rightful owner, Din sensed her hesitation to retrieve it for herself, doubting her own worthiness to wield it for not having to claim it in the way it was supposed to be. He wished Bo-Katan could see herself as he saw her. She continued to prove herself worthy, not just of the saber, but also of Din's respect. But for now, he'd keep the saber for her. I honestly think it's adorable that you actually believe these children's stories, she remarked, her tone tinged with amusement. Din wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or offended by her words. Adorable wasn't a term he expected to hear associated with him as a former bounty hunter. But there is nothing magic about the waters. While Bo-Katan may have dismissed them as mere children's stories, for Din, the creed was fundamental to his identity. It was his purpose, the guiding principle that defined him. Without the creed, what are we? What do we stand for? He asked earnestly, hoping to convey the significance of the creed, not only to himself, but to all their fellow Mandalorians. Our people are scattered like stars in the galaxy. The creed is how we survived. Bo didn't try to argue with him, so he continued speaking. You rescued me, and I'll always be in your debt. But I can't go with you until I fulfill my obligation. I will take you. Her immediate and unexpected response surprised him. Din turned his head to her, wondering if he had heard her correctly. To the living waters? Yes. You'd never find them on your own, she affirmed, and he couldn't deny the truth in her words, especially after his recent brush with danger against a hybrid creepy droid. Not in all this wreckage, she added, grabbing her helmet and holding it underneath her arm. Thank you, Din gratefully expressed, as Bo-Katan stepped forward to lead the way. Don't thank me until you see them, she replied, striding off ahead of him and Grogu. Despite initially deeming Din's goal of reaching the living waters a fool's errand, Bo-Katan still offered to accompany him and Grogu. She didn't need to, but she chose to anyway. Perhaps, Din thought, Bo-Katan didn't despise him as much as he had assumed. Chapter 4. The Living Waters. Summary. Din's POV continuation for Episode 2. The Mines of Mandalore. Din continues to learn more about Bo-Katan as the three of them ventured towards the living waters. Din couldn't fathom that this used to be his people's homeworld. Silence enveloped the trio as Bo-Katan guided them towards the mines. Despite the devastation surrounding them, she navigated the ruins with an uncanny familiarity. She truly possessed an intimate knowledge of the terrain, even in its current state of desolation. It's hard to believe that all of this was once filled with our kind, Din remarked, breaking the solemn silence as they traversed the crumbling remnants of the city. A part of him yearned to have been present during whatever cataclysm had wrought such widespread destruction upon a planet renowned for harboring the galaxy's fiercest warriors. It wasn't that long ago, Bo-Katan replied. You'd never know it looking at all this destruction. It looks like it's been centuries. The Empire set out to punish us. To wipe away our memory. Of course, Din thought. For the Empire, Mandalore was surely a significant threat that needed to be eliminated, and they would do everything to erase their power and legacy. Din couldn't help but notice the tinge of pain in Bo-Katan's voice. It was evident that traversing this desolate landscape, once her domain, was a distressing experience for her. The devastation of Mandalore must have stirred up painful memories she'd rather leave behind, memories resurrected by his call for her aid. Din felt guilty to have intentionally put her in such a heartbreaking situation. It must pain you to see it like this after witnessing its beauty, he stated, empathizing with the weight of sorrow she carried. Despite the personal turmoil it caused her, she still chose to stand by his side, guiding him through the remnants of her shattered world. It wasn't as though she stood to gain anything from this endeavor. Yet she did gain something. Din's admiration and respect for her. What pains me is seeing our own kind fight one another time and time again, she replied. Her reluctance to engage him in combat with the Darksaber suddenly made sense. She refused to raise arms against a fellow Mandalorian. Killing each other for reasons too confusing to explain. It made us weak. We had no hope being smashed by the fist of the Empire. To that, Din agrees as well. The planet wasn't the only thing torn apart. The very fabric of Mandalorian unity had been rent by internal strife. How could they hope to stand against a formidable foe like the Empire when they were divided amongst themselves? Din now understood why she had hesitated to fight him. To do so would have contradicted her fundamental belief in the strength of Mandalorians united. He found yet another reason to respect her, adding to the myriad ways she had already earned his admiration this day. Rescuing him, cooking him soup, and now guiding him through the wreckage despite the mental and emotional turmoil this might be causing her. There, she spoke suddenly, the entrance to the mines of Mandalore. Din was impressed by how swiftly Bo-Katan found it. He couldn't help but wish she had accompanied him from the start, but he understood why she hadn't. As they entered the entrance, Bo-Katan lit up a luminescent device to serve as their flashlight, casting deeper shadows as they ventured into the mines. This area looks much older, Din observed as he looked around. The mines have been here for thousands of years, Bo-Katan explained. The living waters are in the chambers below. Have you been there? Din wondered curiously. Yes, when I was a child. Really? He asked, hoping to encourage her to share more about her experiences growing up on their homeworld. Experiences that he unfortunately didn't have but was eager to learn about. I was part of the royal family, Bo-Katan emphasized, and it made Din cringe inwardly as he remembered how he had called her not Mandalorian to her face on Trask when, all along, she belonged to the clan that had ruled their people. He had some nerve back then. I took the creed and was showered with gifts, but the rituals were all just theater for our subjects. Bo-Katan continued her story, reminiscing about her creed ceremony, yet showing that it hadn't meant much to her. Din could vividly imagine Bo-Katan as a child, impatiently waiting for the whole display to be over. He couldn't help but smile at his imagined version of her as a child. Oddly, he would love to see that. They loved watching the princess recite the Mandalorian tenets as her father looked on proudly. Such a heartwarming spectacle. Despite Bo-Katan's indifference, Din could tell that her father meant more to her, hearing a hint of warmth in her tone as she mentioned him. Yet she was trying to appear nonchalant, as if suggesting that her father's display of parental affection was merely a spectacle. But somehow Din knew it wasn't. Being a father himself now, he could sense that Bo-Katan's father was no different from him, and for some reason, he was sure that he was a better father than himself. Maybe he was proud, Din assured her, as if defending her father from her own skepticism. I know he was, Bo-Katan responded with certainty. I didn't embarrass him in front of everyone. Din smiled beneath his helmet, finding Bo-Katan's father to be an intriguing figure. It wasn't just because of what Bo-Katan had shared about him, although it did offer a glimpse into his character. What truly fascinated Din was Bo-Katan herself. He recognized that her father had raised her to be a fearless warrior, Yet, throughout their time together today, Din had witnessed her display of tenderness towards Grogu and her compassion towards others, towards him. He wondered how her father had instilled such a multifaceted personality in her, and how he could strive to do the same for his own son, now that he had assumed the role of fatherhood. "Your father sounds like an interesting man," he commented. "I would have liked to have known him." "He was a great man," Bo emphasized without hesitation. Then Din noticed how her gaze faltered, as if remembering something somber. "He died defending Mandalore." Din stopped in his tracks upon hearing what Bo-Katan had said about her father. Such sacrifice deserved respect and honor. She must have inherited her father's passion for their planet and their people, willing to do everything in her power to preserve it. Though he hadn't known him personally and hadn't been influenced by him in any way, the kind of devotion to something worth defending and sacrificing one's life for was something Din greatly respected. Not everyone possessed such bravery. Bo-Katan turned to him as she noticed he had stopped walking beside her. Din bowed his head to show respect, the words heavy with emotion as they hung in his throat. "This is the way." He saw how Bo-Katan was caught off guard by his actions, unsure if he had offended her with his sudden gesture. Without waiting to see her reaction, he walked ahead, leaving her and Grogu behind. Din believed he had every right to recognize Bo-Katan's father's sacrifice for their people. Despite not growing up on Mandalore, he still appreciated what her father had done. Yet he couldn't shake the worry that he might have overstepped. He didn't want to risk angering her now that she seemed to have merely tolerated his presence. Thankfully, Bo-Katan didn't mention anything about the gesture as they reached the living waters. "Here you go." The living waters. Finally, Din felt relief wash over him. He had made it, all thanks to Bo-Katan. Now he had the opportunity to redeem himself and reclaim his identity as a Mandalorian. "Hold on, I want to give you the full tour," she playfully said. But for Din, this wasn't the time to humor her indifference. This was a serious matter for him. However, he didn't blame her for her lack of enthusiasm towards the ceremony. She had confided in him that she never really valued her own creed ceremony as a child, so he didn't expect her to care for his. He approached the edge of the waters slowly, noticing a staircase leading to it. He heard Bo-Katan reading something about the history of the living waters, mentioning Mandalore the Great and the Mythosaur, but he paid it little mind as he needed to focus on his redemption. "This is it," Bo-Katan said as she finished reading. Bo-Katan must have noticed his silence and stillness, for she asked with concern, "Din, are you all right?" But Din offered her no reply. Slowly he removed his cape, his jetpack, and his weapons. Bo-Katan didn't speak again, and even Grogu's babbling ceased as Din stepped into the water. "I swear on my name," he started, his voice echoing softly in the chamber, "and the names of the ancestors that I shall walk the way of the Mandalore, and the words of the creed shall be forever forged in my heart." Suddenly he plunged into the depths. Without his jetpack attached, there was no way he could lift himself above the deep waters. His heavy Beskar armor weighed him down further below. Why did this keep happening to him? As he started to slowly slip out of consciousness, he felt someone grab him. Of course it was Bo-Katan saving him again, for the second time that day. It felt oddly familiar. Their first meeting also involved her rescuing him from drowning. It seemed he had a knack for appearing helpless whenever she was around, as if he allowed himself to let his guard down. Had he come to trust her that much? Truthfully, he wasn't sure. But he couldn't keep troubling her like this. He needs to get it together. He felt Bo-Katan's movement abruptly halt for a few seconds, as if something had interrupted her. But Din couldn't find the energy to open his eyes and see what had caused her sudden pause. Then he felt them speeding up through the waters until they were finally airborne, crashing onto the ground with a loud clank of armor. The last thing he saw before drifting once again into unconsciousness was Grogu's pram approaching him and Bo-Katan's heavy breathing, her visor gazing upon the living waters they had managed to escape from. Chapter 5. Kalevala Dogfight. Summary. Din's POV during Episode 3. The Convert. Din slowly stirred back to consciousness, realizing once again that Bo-Katan had saved his life. His debt to her seemed to grow with each rescue, a fact that troubled him deeply. He couldn't afford to become accustomed to relying on her in this way. Turning around, he saw Grogu peering at him with concern, and guilt flooded through him. He'd put his son through too much worry already today. He resolved to make it up to him with a special treat, something to brighten his spirits after such a harrowing experience. As for Bo-Katan, he knew he needed to give her the space she requested. He'd caused her enough trouble for one day. It was time to step back and allow her the solitude she sought in her fortress. "I am redeemed," he offered quietly. She turned to him and nodded simply. "I witnessed it," she confirmed, her voice steady. "You bathed in the living waters. You are Mandalorian again." She suddenly rose from her seat. "Can we leave now?" Din nodded, understanding that there was no reason to prolong their stay. Perhaps her patience with him had worn thin after rescuing him yet again. He couldn't blame her, though he hadn't meant to cause her trouble time and time again. Before moving to walk away from the living waters, Din retrieved a container, carefully gathering water from it. This would serve as the proof he needed to convince the armorer and the tribe of his bath in Mandalore's sacred waters. Evidence was essential. As he was gathering his gear and lifting Grogu back into his pram, Bo-Katan's voice broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" Din turned to her, curious. "What is it? Did you see anything down there?" She started fidgeting her vambrants. Recalling the moments of his plunge and subsequent rescue, Din recounted. "I saw the chasm passing me as I fell. I didn't realize it was so deep." He silently thanked the Force for Bo-Katan's presence. Without her, he might not have survived the ordeal. It wasn't. The bombings from the purge must have triggered seismic activities. Din nodded in understanding. It made sense. Mandalore's sacred waters wouldn't have been designed to pose such a drowning risk, especially for children who embraced the creed. "Did you see anything alive?" Bo-Katan's question caught Din off guard, sparking his curiosity. "Alive?" he echoed, puzzled. What could she mean? Had she spotted something living when she rescued him? Like what? Recalling her brief hesitation before speeding her jetpack, Din couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her question than met the eye. "Nothing," Bo-Katan dismissed, her tone final. "Let's get out of here." Din didn't press her further on her inquiries, though he was curious about what she had seen, if she did see something. He respected Bo-Katan's privacy and decision not to share. He understood that they weren't close enough for her to feel obligated to divulge every detail of her actions. Her reluctance to reveal whatever she had discovered only reinforced Din's understanding that she preferred to keep him at arm's length. She had no interest in forming any kind of relationship with him, and he respected her boundaries. As they made their way out, Din hastened their journey, eager to leave Bo-Katan to her own devices as soon as possible. Lingering any longer might only invite more trouble, and he didn't want to burden her further with his presence. Since they exited the mines, Bo-Katan also grew quieter. He caught himself longing to see her face beneath her helmet, to read her expressions, to discern if she had sustained any injuries while trying to save him from the waters, or to understand her current thoughts. There's no use dwelling on it, though. Once they returned to Kalevala, he imagined things would surely revert to how they used to be between them. Fortunately, they exited the mines without incident, escaping any potential threats or encounters with strange creatures. Din's eyes widened as he beheld Bo-Katan's massive ship waiting outside. It was a Comerc-class fighter transport, even larger than his Razor Crest. Taking the co-pilot seat, Din settled in, with Grogu's pram parked nearby. R5 was already on board, awaiting their return. As Bo-Katan powered up the engines, the gauntlet slowly lifted from the ground, preparing to make its journey back to Kalevala. Silence enveloped them as they neared Kalevala. Din felt the need to address the bantha in the room. Once her gauntlet touched down at her castle, Bo-Katan would likely send him on his way to his N1, leaving him with no reason to seek her out except for the matter of the dark saber. Yet, he reminded himself of his commitment to giving her the space she needed. The dark saber belonged to her, and Din would protect it for her until she was ready to reclaim it. It was the least he could do for all she had done for him. "Bring me back to my ship and I'll be on our way," Din stated. "You will forever have my gratitude. Honestly." Forever might not be enough to express the depth of his gratitude for her repeated acts of saving him from certain death. I would like to invite you in for a feast, but I'm guessing that helmet isn't coming off again, Bo-Katan replied, her gaze briefly flickering towards him. Din couldn't discern her sincerity behind her invitation, given he couldn't read her face beneath her helmet. It seemed contradictory. She had previously urged him to leave, yet now she was extending an invitation to share a meal. What did she truly want from him? Deciding not to ponder on her conflicting behavior, Din simply nodded. "This is the way," Din simply replied. "This is the way," Bo-Katan echoed, surprising him with her agreement. He couldn't help but wonder why she persisted in keeping her helmet on. Oddly, he found himself missing the ability to read the expressions on her face. Then, Grogu babbled something, and Din swore he heard his son trying to mimic their exchange of, "This is the way." Glancing over at Bo-Katan, he saw her turn to look at him, confirming that he hadn't imagined it. Bo-Katan must have heard Grogu's first attempts at speech as well. Before they could process the significance of this moment, the gauntlet was suddenly rocked by a violent attack, throwing them all off balance. They had no time to dwell on the unexpected turn of events as they scrambled to regain control. "We took a hit," Din stated obviously as he hastily checked the screens in front of his seat. "Something's coming up on us fast," Bo-Katan informed him. "It looks like a squadron of TIE interceptors." Din sighed, exasperated. Couldn't they catch a break for just a moment? It became clear that Bo-Katan was struggling to evade the relentless barrage of enemy fire. Din wished he were in his N1 where he could swiftly dispatch the attackers. "How close are we to Kalevala?" he asked urgently. "Not far," Bo grunted as another volley of fire slammed into the gauntlet. They needed a plan, and fast. "Get us back there and I'll reinforce from the N1, Din suggested. "Can you evade them?" "Our shields aren't gonna hold. I need you to back them off," Bo-Katan replied firmly. Without hesitation, Din rose from his seat and made his way to one of the controls of the rear guns on her ship. With each shot fired, he aimed to thin out their attackers until they could clear the atmosphere of Kalevala. "Where'd they come from?" Din wondered aloud. It was clear that the TIE interceptors had caught them completely off guard, suggesting they had been lying in wait, targeting them specifically. But it wasn't him they were after. Their primary target was Bo-Katan, given that this was her ship. "I've scubbed off a lot of Imperial warlords," Bo-Katan shared, and Din's mind immediately flashed back to their first encounter on Trask. It seemed like today was a day for reminiscing about everything that had transpired from the first time they met. They had commandeered an entire ship from an Imperial warlord, and Din suspected it wasn't the only time Bo-Katan had taken such bold action. Naturally, those warlords would hold a grudge, seeking any opportunity to exact revenge. Fortunately, they had chosen a day when Bo-Katan wasn't alone. Din couldn't fathom how she would manage to fend them off by herself, without anyone to rely on. "They tend to get mad when you hijack their ships," Din remarked matter-of-factly, briefly turning to look at Bo before returning his focus to manning the gun. "Now, you tell me?" Bo retorted, her tone indicating her lack of amusement at his quip. Din surprisingly couldn't resist exchanging banter with her, even in the midst of a dire situation. The interceptors continued their relentless pursuit as they entered Kalevala. "Get ready, we're coming in hot. I won't be able to slow down for the drop," Bo warned. Din struggled to eliminate their pursuers. It was challenging to target the nimble interceptors, but he managed to take out at least one. "Interceptors are a lot tougher than TIE fighters," Din remarked, hoping to convey to Bo that he had made little headway in thinning out their enemies. "Are you still up for the transfer?" she asked, and Din nodded, rising from his seat to make his way back to his ship. "I don't see any other choice." As Grogu closed his pram, Din wasted no time. The moment Bo-Katan opened the hatch below, he jumped from the gauntlet, ready to make the transfer back to his own ship. The interceptors continued their relentless assault on the gauntlet as Din descended from the sky. He watched Bo masterfully evade their attacks, leveraging her familiarity with the terrain of Kalevala to her advantage. But time was of the essence, and he needed to act quickly. Activating his jetpack, Din landed with a jolt near his parked N1. He wasted no time, scrambling inside as he saw one of the interceptors closing in on his position. With practiced precision, he lifted the N1 off the ground, just as the interceptor closed in. Dodging and weaving through the sky, Din managed to outmaneuver his pursuer. With a single well-placed shot, he eliminated the threat. "I made it to the N1, heading to you," Din informed Bo-Katan. He could see that she had managed to take out one of the 4 interceptors pursuing her. Now that he was in the N1, the remaining 3 didn't stand a chance. Taking aim, he fired at another interceptor, reducing it to a shower of debris with a satisfying explosion. "Thanks for the backup," relief evident in Bo-Katan's voice. Din felt a swell of pride, glad that he could be of some assistance to her on this day. It was a small gesture compared to all she had done for him. "2 more to go," he replied. "Go right," Bo-Katan instructed. "I'll meet you on the other side." Din wasted no time in following her orders. After a few tense moments, he spotted the gauntlet emerging from his left. With precision aim, he fired at one of the interceptors, successfully eliminating it. "1 down, 1 more to go," Din informed her. "On it," Bo-Katan replied confidently. Judging by her assured tone, Din knew she had the situation under control. He stood by, ready to offer assistance if needed, but trusting in her abilities to handle the remaining threat. As the lone interceptor closed in on her, Bo-Katan abruptly powered down her engine. Din watched in awe as she expertly maneuvered one of the gauntlet's wings, using it to pivot the ship around and catch the interceptor off guard. With precise aim, she unleashed a barrage of fire, obliterating the last of their pursuers. Din couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for Bo-Katan's skill and ingenuity. They had made a formidable team, and he found himself hoping that someday, when the tension between them had dissipated, she might be willing to join him on missions. She had proven herself to be an invaluable ally in battle, and he hoped that he could be the same for her. Chapter 6. Covert and Convert. Summary. Din's POV continuation for Episode 3, The Convert. Din waited for the gauntlet's engine to activate as he drove towards it. When the gauntlet was back in atmosphere, he piloted his starfighter beside it to check on its passengers. He was relieved to see that the gauntlet didn't appear significantly damaged despite taking numerous hits from the interceptors. "Not bad for an antique," Bo-Katan complimented his ship. "You take any damage?" he inquired. "Just shields," she replied. "You?" "Not a scratch," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Let's take him in just to be sure," she suggested, and Din agreed. If she didn't mind him being around for another hour or so, he was more than willing to wait for his N1 to be properly inspected. After the disastrous day they had all endured, he also welcomed the chance to rest for a while. Turning his head to the gauntlet, he noticed Bo-Katan's visor turned in his direction as well. "Nice shooting," she said. Din smiled at her compliment, grateful for the acknowledgement of his skills. He nodded in appreciation, not expecting such praise from her. Though her face remained hidden beneath her helmet, he could almost hear the smile in her voice through the comm. It felt good to be on good terms with her, Din realized. The alarm of the N1 startled Din as his ship detected something on the enemy proximity warning indicator. "Hang on, I'm seeing something on the scope." Explosions rang out nearby, filling the air with smoke as their ship stood. Din watched as plumes rose into the atmosphere, accompanied by the ominous presence of TIE bombers flying overhead. "No!" Do's shocked gasp echoed through the comm. Din's eyes widened with realization. Was it her castle that was being bombed? As they approached, the castle lay in flames and ruins, the bombers continuing their assault with deafening explosions. "Those mudscuffers bombed my home," Bo-Katan declared, her voice seething with anger. "Oh, she's going to make them pay for it." The gauntlet surged towards the trio of bombers responsible for destroying her fortress. Din trailed behind, ready to offer assistance, but he decided to let her take the lead. He didn't want to interfere with her righteous anger. With precision, she targeted one of the bombers, expertly reducing it to pieces. Din's enemy proximity warning indicator blared again, this time more urgently, revealing a larger incoming force. "It's a trap," Din attempted to warn Bo-Katan. Pursuing the bombers further would only put her and Grogu in danger. She couldn't afford to be reckless. "Bo, we've got company," he called out urgently, not realizing how naturally he used her nickname with familiarity. But it seemed Bo-Katan hadn't heard him, so he called out to her once more. She couldn't allow her anger to cloud her judgment. She needed to snap out of it. "Oh, listen to me. You have to get out of there," Din said urgently, panic evident in his voice as he circled his N1 around the gauntlet repeatedly, hoping Bo-Katan would notice him and snap out of her anger. "There's too many of them. We've got to get out of here." His efforts succeeded as Bo-Katan turned the gauntlet around, preparing to escape Kalevala with him. There was no doubt that whoever had come here wasn't merely seeking to destroy Bo-Katan's home. They were also intent on killing her. Din was determined not to let that happen. "That's a lot of ships for an Imperial warlord," Bo-Katan commented through the comm. She was right. This wasn't merely a vendetta against her. It was something more sinister. But they needed to escape first before delving into who might be behind it all. "I'm sending jump coordinates," Din informed her, quickly transmitting the coordinates to a location where they could hide from their pursuers. "To where?" "Someplace they won't find us." Din transmitted the coordinates to Bo-Katan, leading her towards his covert's hidden location. Despite uncertainty about how they might be received, it was the only place he could think of where she might find refuge. He opted not to disclose their destination to her, sensing she might not appreciate being directed there. With her recent loss and her previous disdain for his tribe, referring to it as a cult, now wasn't the time to broach the topic of his covert. Allowing her a moment of silence, Din remained quiet as they entered hyperspace, giving Bo-Katan time to process the devastating loss of her castle. Not only was she alone, but she was also homeless and being pursued by the Empire. Din hoped that his covert would extend hospitality to her, despite their different ways. He couldn't help but wonder how the armorer would react upon seeing him bring the very cautionary tale she had shared to him to their covert. He prayed that it would go smoothly. If they were unwilling to accommodate Bo-Katan, Din vowed to find another safe haven for her. He wouldn't leave her alone until he was certain she was out of danger and free from the Empire's threats. Bo-Katan remained silent, still processing her loss. Din understood her need for space, recalling his own feelings when his Razor Crest was destroyed. He respected her time to gather herself, hoping Grogu wasn't adding to her distress, knowing the child's usual antics. After a few moments, they emerged from hyperspace and approached the planet where his covert was hidden. "Mind telling me where we're going?" Bo-Katan's sudden question through the comm startled Din. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Din prepared to answer her. "Here goes nothing. I'm taking you to a Mandalorian covert," he replied simply, hoping she wouldn't be upset about their destination. This is how we've survived in exile. It might not be a place she wanted to go or people she wanted to be associated with, but Din had no better options for her at the moment. He just hoped she wouldn't turn back into hyperspace. And she didn't. "I'm familiar," she simply remarked, suggesting this wasn't her first encounter with Mandalorians like them. "It's a secret location, and you were my guest," Din explained. This place was meant to be known only to members of the covert. He wasn't even considered a member anymore. But once he was redeemed, he would have the right to offer Bo-Katan the refuge she needed, even though she wasn't part of his tribe. They still live by the old ways. "Yes, it will go smoother if you keep your helmet on. Trust me," Din instructed her. She needed their help, and she couldn't have that if she offended his people by removing her helmet in front of them. She needed to stay in their good graces, and Din was certain Bo-Katan didn't want to start any more fights. She would just have to endure this. And if she couldn't, Din would think of somewhere else to take her. Din expected Bo-Katan to argue about the helmet rules, but she didn't. Of course, she relented, though there was a hint of annoyance in her tone. Their ships landed side by side and Din rose from his N1 as it opened up, waiting for the passengers of the gauntlet to emerge. Bo-Katan walked alongside Grogu in his pram, and Din nodded at her before descending from his ship. Together, the three of them proceeded towards the entrance of their covert. Paz Vizsla stood at the forefront of the covert's welcoming committee. Seeing that they were all armed and wary, Din could tell he wasn't exactly welcomed here. Bo-Katan walking beside him immediately drew everyone's attention. Din wondered if his fellow covert members recognized her. "Come no further. You're an apostate, Djarin," Paz declared as soon as they reached the entrance. Not anymore, Din retorted. I have been to the mines of Mandalore. Impossible. Paz quickly dismissed him. The mines were collapsed in the purge. The planet is cursed. Right. That was the narrative their covert had been fed. But it was all false. These are lies meant to keep us in exile, Din countered. How do we know it's not you who is lying? Paz challenged, his disbelief evident. He speaks the truth. Bo-Katan immediately came to Din's defense, and Din felt grateful for her support. She had witnessed his successful immersion, or rather submersion, in the waters. He was glad she was standing by him. I was a witness. Paz turned his gaze to her. And who are you, Night Owl? He asked with disdain. Bo-Katan stepped forward slowly, and Din silently urged her not to remove her helmet. As much as he was angered by Paz's attitude, now wasn't the time to provoke a confrontation. Thankfully, Bo-Katan refrained from taking off her helmet. I am Bo-Katan of Clan Kryze, she introduced herself. Your house has fallen from the way, Paz stated with certainty, indicating he was familiar with Bo and her clan. You are both apostates. We have been to the living waters, Din emphasized loudly, and his fellow covert members exchanged looks of disbelief. To dispel their doubts, he retrieved the tube containing the water he had extracted. I bring proof. Paz glanced at the evidence, seeming to consider it for a moment before clearing the way for them to enter. We shall see, Paz said simply. Din led the way, with Grogu and Bo-Katan following closely behind. Everyone's attention seemed to be fixed on Bo-Katan. They must have been intrigued by the presence of the former ruler of Mandalore alongside Din. To be honest, this is also surreal for Din, as it was for them. Turning to Bo-Katan, he found himself quite frustrated by the helmet still concealing her face. He couldn't gauge how she was feeling without asking her, but he sensed her discomfort. He knew she didn't hold his tribe in high regard, and being surrounded by his people must have been overwhelming for her. Din wanted to apologize for subjecting her to this, as if she hadn't endured enough already this day. Finally, they reached the armorer, who appeared to be forging something with her back turned to them. Din wondered if she would recognize Bo-Katan just from her armor and what kind of reaction she would have underneath her helmet. Didn't Djarin claims to have bathed in the living waters, Paz Vizsla stated. Is this true? The armorer asked, her attention now focused on them. It is. I have proof, Din affirmed, handing the tube to the armorer as she turned around. I was a witness, Bo-Katan interjected, offering her support. He fell into the depths, and I pulled him out. Din wished she had left out the second part, but it was the truth. If it helped prove how Bo-Katan had witnessed his creed ceremony, he didn't mind being embarrassed for nearly drowning in the living waters. The armorer didn't reply to Bo-Katan, but she didn't dismiss her either. So far, everything that was happening seemed tolerable, but Din couldn't help but wonder how Bo-Katan was faring under that helmet of hers. He speaks the truth, the armorer declared after she poured the living waters into a cauldron. These are indeed the living waters. Din Djarin, you are redeemed, she announced, and Din breathed a sigh of relief. This is the way. This is the way, echoed the covert. Finally, he had reclaimed the identity and purpose he had lost. And Bo-Katan Kryze, the armorer continued, walking over to Bo-Katan. Din felt a nervous pang, unsure of what the armorer was about to say to her. He hoped it wasn't something that would add insult to the wounds she had acquired on this day alone. By creed, you too are redeemed. Din blinked in surprise as he turned his head to Bo-Katan. He could swear he sensed her confusion as well through her helmet. What in the world was happening? Was the armorer offering Bo-Katan a chance to join their tribe? That wasn't what he had in mind when he brought her here. She was just supposed to be his guest. Knowing Bo-Katan, the thought of even associating with his cult likely disgusted her. Surely she hadn't accompanied him here to become one of them. But I do not walk the way, Bo-Katan replied. Have you bathed in the waters? The armorer inquired. I did, Bo-Katan answered. And have you removed your helmet since? Din held his breath as he waited for Bo-Katan's answer. He couldn't recall seeing her remove it, but there was a chance she might have when they were separated, or during their transfer from his N1. Nonetheless, he hoped she hadn't. If this was the key to her acceptance into the covert without hostility, then they should seize this chance for sanctuary, even if just temporarily. "No, I have not," Bo-Katan confirmed. "Then you may join our covert and live as your ancestors once did," the armorer declared. Bo-Katan looked at Din, seeking some understanding of what was happening. Din nodded, silently urging her to go along with it. "You may leave any time you wish. Until then, you are one of us." With those words, she was officially part of his tribe. "Welcome, Bo-Katan of Clan Kryze. This is the way. This is the way," the covert echoed once more. After their official redemption, his fellow covert members approached both him and Bo-Katan, tapping their pauldrons and offering welcoming words. Din expressed his gratitude to each of them, but he couldn't help glancing at Bo-Katan from time to time. She simply gave a respectful nod to those who approached her. He had once again placed her in an uncomfortable position. First in the mines, where she was forced to confront the memories of her homeworld's destruction, and now she was compelled to join his people. The very group she despised, the ones who had never aided her during the purge. She was now obligated to adhere to rules she didn't value. Din hadn't intended to do this, but it seemed he was quite adept at it. After their fellow Mandalorians dispersed, Din noticed Bo-Katan heading towards her gauntlet. Was she leaving? Did she detest this situation so much? She couldn't leave, it would put her in danger, and she had nowhere else to go. "Bo-Katan!" Din called out, causing her to halt before stepping into her ship. He didn't want her to think that what had happened was part of some hidden agenda of his. He didn't want her to misunderstand. "I didn't bring you here with this on mind." Din expected her frustration, yet he was surprised to hear her chuckle filtered through her helmet's modulator. "Din," she began as she turned to face him. "I know. After the whole Moff Gideon incident, I've come to the conclusion that most of the things that happened to you are not part of your plan." Right. What had happened there, when he had asked Bo for help in rescuing Grogu, wasn't what he had in mind either. He always seemed to stumble into things accidentally, and it appeared this habit of his had inadvertently drawn Bo-Katan into his tribe. "Are you okay with this?" Din asked with genuine concern. He couldn't quite explain why her feelings mattered to him so much right now. Perhaps it was because her state mirrored exactly how he had felt when Grogu was gone. Homeless, his razor crest destroyed by the Empire, covertless, cast out the moment he had lifted his helmet for Grogu, devoid of purpose, the life of a bounty hunter losing its appeal. Bo-Katan had no one and nothing, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had played a part in her predicament too. So he felt responsible for her, and he wouldn't shirk that responsibility. He would protect her, just as he had protected Grogu when the Empire hunted him down with the intent to kill. Goodness, did he seem to have a knack for rescuing beings the Empire wanted to pursue? "Do I have a choice?" Bo-Katan replied. Indeed, whether she was okay with it or not didn't change the fact that this was the only place she could be safe right now. "So will you stay?" "Yes," she simply replied, "but only for a while." Din nodded, understanding her need for temporary refuge. He would ensure they found a safe planet for her to settle on when the time came. "Excuse me, do you mind giving me some time for myself?" "Of course," Din replied, stepping back to give her the space she needed. Today must have been overwhelming for her. "Just call for me if you need anything." "Okay," Bo-Katan said as she continued to step inside. But then she paused. "Thank you, Din, for today." As she entered her ship, Din wondered what exactly she was thanking him for. He berated himself for causing her discomfort and trouble throughout their brief encounters. He wondered if she was truly the troublemaker people needed to avoid. Resolving to make her brief stay in his covert as tolerable and comfortable as possible, Din vowed to do his utmost for the woman who had saved his life twice in just this one day alone. Chapter 7. Grogu's First Fight. Summary. Din's POV for Episode 4. The Foundling. Alternative title, Din and Bo becoming supportive parents to Grogu. Din was taken aback by Bo-Katan's steadfast adherence to their tribe's rules. He had anticipated that she would barely tolerate the helmet rule for just a few hours, yet she had been wearing it for the entirety of her stay with them. Not only that, but she had also been actively inquiring about their customs and practices. Throughout it all, she never once complained or spoke ill of his covert. He had expected her to approach him, expressing her inability to continue abiding by these rules, given her reputation for charting her own path rather than following others. Bo-Katan had always been a leader, not a follower, but to his surprise, she remained committed to respecting their ways without hesitation. Din remained resolute in his willingness to assist Bo-Katan, even if the day arrived when she chose to remove her helmet and distance herself from the tribe. His determination to safeguard her will remained steadfast. However, he also felt a sense of gratitude towards her for attempting to adapt to his people's way of life, despite having the freedom to do otherwise. While she may have claimed she had no choice, Din knew her to be stubborn, always opting for a course of action that aligned with her desires. Yet perhaps after losing the Darksaber and her fleet, her resolve had faltered. With the loss of her leadership position, she may have lost the motivation to maintain her former demeanor. Din couldn't fault her if that were the case. "Where did you meet her?" Paz Vizsla suddenly asked Din as they both prepared for the foundling's morning training. "Who?" Din inquired, though he already had a suspicion of whom Paz was referring to. "The night owl," Paz replied, his tone probing. "Do you even have the slightest idea who she is?" "I encountered her while seeking more of our kind on Trask. She assisted me in locating a Jedi like Grogu. She also aided in rescuing the child from Moff Gideon," Din responded as he readied the weapons for training. "And yes, I am familiar with who she is. I've inquired about her from the armorer." "Then aren't you worried?" Din turned to Paz, puzzled by his question. "Worried about what?" "Bo-Katan Kryze's motives for joining us. She used to wield the saber you now possess," Paz explained, his tone cautious. "Are you certain she harbors no intentions of reclaiming the saber or taking control of our covert?" "No, I'm not concerned about any of that," Din responded without second thoughts. "Why not?" "She was present when I defeated Moff Gideon and inadvertently claimed the Darksaber myself. I offered the weapon to her and awaited her challenge," Din recounted. "But she never made a move to claim it from me." "She didn't challenge you in a fight for it?" Paz's disbelief was evident in his voice. "That seems unlikely. But it's true," Din asserted firmly. "And as for the covert, trust me, she has no interest in leading us. She's not fond of our tribe." "Then why did you bring her here in the first place?" "She needed assistance, and I have every intention of repaying the help she offered me. Just ensure that whoever you bring here doesn't stir up trouble for our covert once again," Paz remarked as he began to walk away from Din. Like what occurred before, of course he had to bring it up. Din had no intention of forgetting his brothers and sisters whose lives were sacrificed because he chose to protect Grogu. Now he had brought another individual entangled in the Empire's pursuit. However, he was determined not to let what happened in the past be repeated with Bo-Katan. Surprisingly, the armorer had no objections to Bo-Katan's presence. Despite cautioning him about her, she did not protest her stay. Din was grateful for that. As Din moved toward the children practicing their combat skills, he paused when he noticed Bo-Katan strolling around observing the activities of his people. He had briefed her the previous night about the tribe's routine and informed her that today was when the foundlings were scheduled for training. He couldn't quite discern if Bo-Katan appeared lost or simply unsure of what to do. The members of the tribe seemed wary of her, understandable given her newness among them. Trust was not something easily earned, especially considering their recent history. The last time they protected someone akin to whom Din now safeguarded, many of them perished. Now, they were tasked with sheltering another individual who had been ingrained as a cautionary tale. Din pondered how to engage her and perhaps assign her a role for today's training. However, his first task was to fetch Grogu to commence his initial training as a Mandalorian foundling. He found his son sitting on the sand, clutching a shell crab. Not again, Din thought. unable to fathom Grogu's ongoing hunger despite the hefty breakfast he had already consumed. Approaching him, Din crouched down to speak with him. "Put down the rocks, kid. It's time that you learn with the other foundlings." Grogu hesitated, babbling in reluctance to part with the crabs. "Playtime's over," Din asserted firmly as he lifted Grogu from the sand, preparing to take him to the battlegrounds. "I'm gonna need you to focus." Carrying Grogu, Din placed him in line to challenge the winner of the fight unfolding before them. "Next challenger," he announced, noticing Bo-Katan approaching as she observed his intentions with Grogu. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Bo-Katan asked Din, her tone etched with worry as he approached them. Din appreciated Bo-Katan's concern for Grogu, but he was confident that there was nothing to be worried about. He couldn't wait for her to witness the extent of Grogu's force abilities. "If he is ever to rise from foundling to apprentice, he must learn," Din affirmed. "Judge," Din called the attention of the judge, and the kid wearing a blue helmet approached as the winner of the previous battle. "He challenges." The judge hesitated, eyeing Grogu's diminutive form. "He is too small." "I'm his ward, proceed," Din insisted. "What weapon?" The judge relented. "Let the challenge decide." Din gestured to the child Grogu was about to face off against, recalling that this was the child under Paz Vizsla's care. "Darts," the kid replied. Din breathed a sigh of relief. Grogu would have been at a disadvantage in hand-to-hand combat, and Din hadn't yet taught him how to use their weapons. While Grogu didn't know how to use darts either, it was a simpler option compared to their other weapons. "Bring the training darts," the judge ordered. Vizsla's foundling questioned why Grogu wasn't wearing a helmet. Din calmly explained that his son hadn't yet mastered the words of the creed, asserting he was too young, despite Grogu being older than the other child or Din himself. However, he swiftly defended Grogu when the Vizsla child remarked that Grogu was too young to fight. Grogu glanced up at Din as if silently pleading. "Dad, did you hear that?" Bo-Katan seemed poised to defend Grogu, but Din spoke first. "One does not speak unless one knows. Is that not the creed?" "Well, I know," the child confidently replied. "Yep, definitely Vizsla's child." "Perhaps this lesson is for you, then," Din retorted with a smug smile. This child had no idea what Grogu was capable of. "The training darts." One of their fellow Mandalorians brought the box containing the training darts. "Fighters, arm yourselves." The judge handed one to Vizsla's foundling. Din knew Grogu couldn't possibly arm himself without assistance, so he leaned toward Bo-Katan, who stood next to him, and whispered, "Could you help Grogu?" Bo-Katan turned quickly to him, seeming a little surprised by his request, but immediately nodded and stepped towards the judge to receive Grogu's training darts. Though he could sense that Bo-Katan was reluctant to involve herself with their tribe, Din wanted to demonstrate that she wasn't useless. If the members of the covert didn't trust her, he wanted to show them that he did, and that Bo-Katan wasn't as bad as they believed. Beneath her armor, she was a caring person. Bo-Katan knelt in front of Grogu as the child extended his arm for her to attach his darts to his tiny wrist. "Don't worry," Bo-Katan whispered to Grogu as she fastened the darts. "My dad was the same way. He's just proud of you." Din couldn't help but smile upon hearing how Bo-Katan comforted the child. He wasn't particularly skilled at offering comfort, nor was he adept at expressing his thoughts in words. Sometimes he found himself at a loss for what to say to his son, but for Bo-Katan, the words seemed to flow effortlessly. He was grateful that she understood the underlying reason for involving Grogu in this battle. He simply wanted to showcase his son, proud of the being he had become and the path he had chosen. He wouldn't place Grogu in a situation he couldn't handle. He appreciated that Bo-Katan conveyed this sentiment for him. Din found himself pondering about Bo-Katan's mention of her own father. Did he also expose her to battles at a young age? He noticed that this was the second time she had openly spoken about her father to him and Grogu. She must have missed him greatly. When the darts were finally secured on Grogu's wrist, or rather half of his arm, Bo-Katan patted the child's little shoulder as he looked up at her. "You take it easy on him, kid." Din swore he could hear the smile in Bo-Katan's voice. He hadn't been mistaken about her fondness for Grogu. This led him to wonder if Bo-Katan had experience dealing with children before, given how adept she was at it. The judge explained the rules of the battle, and just before it commenced, Grogu turned to Din, babbling worriedly. It seemed his son wasn't entirely sure if he could do this. But Din believed in him. Of course, he needed to instruct him on how to use the weapon first. So he crouched down to speak with his son. "Squeeze your fist to launch the darts," he explained, hoping the child understood. "You'll be fine." As he stood back up, Bo-Katan whispered to him, "He doesn't know how to fire darts?" Worry was evident in her tone. She must have been questioning if Din was putting Grogu in a situation he wasn't fully prepared for. "He's got this," Din reassured her, unwavering in his confidence in his son's abilities. "Trust me." Bo-Katan didn't argue, but her lingering worry for Grogu was evident as her visor remained focused on the child before them. The fight finally began, and the Vizsla child landed the first shot. But Din wasn't worried. He believed Grogu could still emerge victorious. The second time, the Vizsla child scored another point. So Din moved to encourage and motivate Grogu. And it worked. Drawing on what he had learned from Skywalker, Grogu tapped into his Force abilities. After a clever flip jump, he fired all 3 of his darts consecutively, securing victory in his very first fight as a foundling. Din couldn't have been prouder in that moment. "Did you teach him that?" Bo-Katan asked, her tone a mix of amusement and pride in Grogu's achievement. "Not me," Din replied. Din commended Grogu for a job well done, as Vizsla's child sadly walked away after his defeat. Bo-Katan also congratulated Grogu, and the little one babbled in what Din assumed to be gratitude. But before the 3 of them could celebrate Grogu's victory, another incident occurred. A giant flying creature with enormous wings suddenly appeared before the covert. Din was grateful for Bo-Katan for immediately grabbing Grogu in her arms to protect him before he could even react. Unfortunately, Vizsla's foundling was the one the creature chose to grab. Din quickly brought out his blaster to shoot the creature, but Paz warned him that such action could endanger the child. He was right. If Din blasted the creature while it was moving in the air, he might miss and hit the kid instead. So both he and Paz activated their jetpacks to follow the creature to its lair. Creatures like that often didn't eat their prey immediately. They tended to store their food before devouring it when hunger struck. However, they hadn't expected the creature to fly such a long distance. Their fellow Mandalorians who had followed them ran out of fuel already, and after a few moments, both Paz and Din's jetpacks also ran out of fuel, allowing the creature to escape with the foundling. Paz and he realized that there was no chance they could retrieve the child. They couldn't possibly travel that far with their jetpacks. But then, a whooshing sound of a ship caught their attention. The gauntlet was in the air, following the creature. That was really smart of Bo-Katan. Din had a ship with enough fuel, but he hadn't even thought about using it. They walked back to their covert, and upon returning, Din hastily made his way to his N1. Bo-Katan was alone out there, following that dangerous creature. What if she needed assistance? What if the creature noticed her ship and attacked her? He needed to go with her. The kid's safety was not solely her responsibility after all, so she shouldn't be the one risking her life to save someone who was part of his covert. But before he could even approach his starfighter, Bo-Katan's gauntlet returned and landed in their covert. Din breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing her safe and sound. But she wasn't with the child, so he guessed she hadn't had the chance to retrieve him. "I kept a high altitude and followed it to its lair," she reported. "I know how to get there. We should muster up a hunting party and go after him." Din was surprised by Bo-Katan's determination. She was really committed to save the child and was convinced that he could still be rescued. Who knew the child might be in that creature's belly by now? It was admirable of her that she was willing to go that far to rescue a child from a tribe she wanted nothing to do with. But Din guessed that Bo-Katan wanted to return the hospitality she had received from them. Or maybe foundlings had a soft spot in her heart, like how she helped him rescue Grogu. Whatever the reason was, it just made Din admire her even more than he already did. Chapter 8. Saving Ragnar 1. Summary. Din's POV continuation on Episode 4, Part 2 of The Foundling. As Din began eating his meal in silence, his mind started to wander to Bo-Katan. Bo-Katan explained her scouting mission to him, the armorer, and Paz Vizsla as they gathered around the projector, where the creature's lair was displayed. There, Bo-Katan pointed to the peak of a daunting mountain. The nest. It flew a long way, Din observed. I will go get him, Bo-Katan stated firmly. Din turned to her, torn between protest and a desire to allow Bo-Katan to have this opportunity to prove her trustworthiness to the tribe. Perhaps this mission could also reignite her lost motivation over the past years. The mountains are too high. If we use jetpacks, the beast will hear. Paz voiced his concern. A valid point. It would kill the child, the armorer agreed. These are no higher than the peaks of Karimorut. I used to climb them in basic training, Bo-Katan informed, displaying her skill and determination. I'll fly to the foothills, scale the rest of the way on foot. Din immediately offered his support. I'll join you, he said without hesitation, unwilling to let her face the danger alone. Bo-Katan nodded, silently conveying her gratitude. The armorer suggested they accompany the Shriek Hawk training team and provided them with necessary supplies for the rescue mission. They had to depart immediately using Bo-Katan's gauntlet. Grogu expressed a desire to accompany them, and Din struggled to convince him otherwise. Despite reassurances that he would return soon, Grogu clung to him, reminiscent of their separation when Grogu left with the Jedi. Grogu, come on, Din pleaded his son gently. I will come back, I promise. But Grogu refused to release his grip. Din felt helpless. If he could take Grogu with him, he would. However, the armorer had warned that Grogu might be endangered, being too young for such a mission. Bo-Katan approached them and crouched down, leaning towards Grogu, who still clung tightly to Din's boot, burying his face. Don't worry, kid, she comforted, patting his back. He'll be back before you know it. Besides, I'm coming with your dad, and I'll keep an eye on him for you. All right? Her words seemed to reassure Grogu, as he lifted his head to look at Bo-Katan's visor. I promise I won't let him do anything stupid, Bo-Katan assured Grogu. After a series of babbling responses, the child finally began to release Din's boot. Din marveled at Bo-Katan's skill in providing reassurance. It appeared she had earned Grogu's trust as well. After bidding Grogu farewell and entrusting him to the armorer's care, Din and Bo-Katan boarded the gauntlet. Not bringing your N1? Bo-Katan inquired, and Din shook his head. It's more practical to travel in just one ship, Din explained, and Bo-Katan nodded in agreement. You must be getting used to being a passenger princess, Bo-Katan teased, lifting her ship from the ground. Din settled into his usual spot in the co-pilot seat. The other covert Mandalorians remained stationed at the gauntlet's drop-off point. Well, I've spent some time without a personal ship anyway, Din remarked. What happened to your Razor Crest? Bo-Katan asked, curiosity lacing her tone. It was blown to pieces, Din replied, a touch of sadness coloring his tone. Bo-Katan paused her movements, though she didn't turn to face him, her visor fixed forward. When? Before we rescued Grogu from Moff Gideon, Din explained. Bo let out a quiet hum of understanding as she continued piloting the gauntlet towards the creature's lair. Seems I wasn't the only one here who lost her home, Bo-Katan remarked softly, a hint of melancholy in her voice. That's right, Din agreed, his emotions stirring as memories of his old ship flooded back. For him, the Razor Crest was not just merely a vessel. It had been his haven, his home. Despite the sleekness of the N1, the Razor Crest held a special place in Din's heart that could never be replaced. Surely Bo-Katan felt the same way about her castle in Kalevala. I'm truly sorry for your loss. I'm sorry about your Razor Crest as well, Bo-Katan offered sincerely. Silence settled between them as their journey continued. Bo-Katan was the one who prompted to break it. So, she began, shifting slightly in her seat. Tell me, how did you travel the galaxy with no ship of your own before you got your starfighter? Riding passenger transports, Din admitted, feeling a twinge of embarrassment. Passenger transports? Amusement colored Bo-Katan's voice. They don't allow weapons on board, do they? No, they don't. Then that they confiscated your weapons before boarding? Yes. She turned to him slowly, her gaze piercing through her visor. Did you stow the dark saber in the aircraft's control box? Din swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her scrutiny. He remained silent, but Bo-Katan continued to stare, waiting for his response. Din, she said, her voice tinged with a hint of threat. I did, he admitted reluctantly. You... She stopped abruptly, frustration evident in her tone. How could you be so careless? You entrusted the dark saber to an airline. Look, I didn't have much choice. I couldn't bring it with me inside, but I made it clear that they were responsible for it, Din explained, feeling the need to defend his actions. Still, what if it had been lost? Bo-Katan argued. But it wasn't, Din countered. You might as well have handed it to anyone who wanted it, Bo-Katan pointed out. No, I would not, Din replied firmly. He knew the saber belonged to someone who rightfully deserved it, her. So why would he just hand it over to anyone else? Really? Bo-Katan challenged. I can imagine you readily offering the saber to anyone who wanted it from you. No, I wouldn't and didn't do something like that, Din insisted. Didn't? Bo-Katan noticed his choice of words. Has someone already challenged you for it? Yes, someone did, Din admitted, recalling the recent confrontation with Paz Vizsla, who was currently with them inside the gauntlet. But I emerged victorious. Din remembered the fight vividly. He knew he could have surrendered the dark saber to Paz, as it held no personal significance to him. If Paz wanted it and was willing to claim it, he would have been relieved of the burden it brought. However, he couldn't ignore the fact that the saber already belonged to someone else. Bo-Katan had fought tirelessly to reclaim it from Moff Gideon, and handing it over to just anyone would have felt like disregarding her sacrifices. The dark saber held more than just symbolic value for Bo-Katan. When he had heard her story from the armorer, Din understood the deeper significance of her quest. It represented her redemption, a chance to reclaim her place as the leader of their people. Bo-Katan had helped him find redemption, and Din was determined to return the favor. If that meant safeguarding the dark saber until she was ready to wield it, then so be it. Do you know how to wield it already? Bo-Katan asked, curiosity evident in her voice. Din hesitated. The memory of his clumsy attempts at wielding the dark saber haunted him. Don't tell me you didn't try using it. Bo-Katan turned to him briefly, her tone teasing. I did use it a couple of times, actually, Din admitted reluctantly. How did it go? Din swore he could hear the faint smile in her voice as she continued to interrogate him. Din sighed, his embarrassment evident as he sheepishly replied. I cut myself with it once. I guess that sums it up. He shrugged awkwardly, recalling his lack of finesse. Bo-Katan suddenly burst into laughter, the sound filling the cockpit. Din couldn't help but feel a pang in his chest at the genuine sound of her laughter. He caught himself wishing her helmet was off so he could see what kind of face she makes when she laughs. Quickly pushing aside such thoughts, he focused on the conversation. You what? Bo-Katan exclaimed between laughs. I'm struggling to wield it. It feels heavy and unwieldy, Din confessed, his frustration evident in his tone. I guess I could teach you how to wield it, Bo-Katan offered, her laughter subsiding. Teach him? Din wondered what the purpose would be. Din wanted to refuse, but he couldn't deny the practicality of learning to wield the dark saber properly. If he continued to hold it for Bo-Katan, he needed to be able to defend himself with it. Losing it to anyone was not an option. Plus, perhaps as Bo-Katan taught him, she would regain the confidence to reclaim it from him, demonstrating her superior skill. You would? Din asked cautiously, and Bo-Katan nodded. Yes, I have plenty of time, she replied earnestly. Din smiled as Bo-Katan's offer to teach him how to wield the dark saber affirmed to him that this woman wouldn't be leaving them anytime soon. That thought inexplicably eased his worries and brought him relief. Moments later, the gauntlet touched down a short distance from the beast's lair. They disembarked and proceeded on foot, knowing that using Bo-Katan's ship would alert the creature and potentially jeopardize their mission. Upon reaching their destination, Bo-Katan suggested they camp below the creature's lair for the night, out of sight. They would begin their ascent at first light. Din appreciated the willingness of the team to follow Bo-Katan's orders, despite her being new to the tribe and not having the best reputation among them. Even Paz Vizsla, whom Din often clashed with, trusted Bo-Katan to ensure his child's safety. Din had confidence in Bo-Katan's abilities to rescue Vizsla's child. Considering her successful leadership in rescuing Grogu, her strategic planning and execution displayed not only her combat prowess, but also her leadership experience. She possessed an authoritative aura that commanded respect and loyalty from those around her. Din remembered their encounter on Trask, where he found himself unable to challenge her when she altered their agreement, mocking him with his own "this is the way" phrase. Bo-Katan had a knack for steering situations to her advantage, leaving Din impressed by her ingenuity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting darkness over the sky, their team set about making camp and kindling a fire. The armorer had packed provisions to sustain them for the rescue mission. "How do you eat when others are around?" Bo-Katan whispered to Din, leaning in slightly. In the covert, Bo-Katan typically retreated to her gauntlet to dine alone. However, with their ship far from reach, she seemed puzzled as to how they could eat without violating the creed in such close quarters. "You don't. You find a secluded spot to remove your helmet," Din explained, and she nodded in understanding. When dinner was served, Din stood up from his seat, ready to follow Bo-Katan and find a spot nearby where she would settle. However, Paz stepped in, asserting that as the team's leader, Bo-Katan deserved the honor of dining by the fire. Reluctantly, Din acquiesced, watching as Bo-Katan remained by the flames while he ventured off to find a secluded spot nearby. He chose a spot just a few paces away, settling into the enveloping darkness and tranquil silence of the night. Din carefully removed his helmet, placing it beside him as he began to eat his meal. It struck him that this was the first time since Grogu's return that he had dined alone. Memories flooded back of the time when Grogu had left. They had formed a routine of sharing meals together, however brief their time had been. The child had become his closest semblance of family, and meals aboard the Razor Crest had felt warmer, tasted better with his presence. During their separation, eating had lost its joy, becoming merely a necessity for sustenance. The absence of Grogu made each meal feel hollow, lacking the companionship they once shared. Now, Din never ate without Grogu by his side. He even considered raising his helmet to his mouth during meals, willing to bend the creed's rules just a little so the two of them could always share a meal together. He wondered if Grogu had eaten yet, and hoped the child wasn't causing trouble for the armorer. His thoughts then turned to Bo-Katan. He remembered how she had always been comfortable dining without her helmet in the company of others. The memory of their interactions with her night owls on Trask, where she and her companions had enjoyed a meal together, lingered in his mind. Unlike his covert, Bo-Katan's group didn't adhere as strictly to the creed. Perhaps she had grown accustomed to sharing meals with others, finding solace and camaraderie in their company. He remembered her invitation on their journey back to Kalevala, where she had expressed a desire to host a feast for him. Did she genuinely mean it? Perhaps she longed for companionship. Din wondered how long she had been dining alone in her castle. As he sat in solitude, he wondered about Bo-Katan's own experience. With her fleet having departed, leaving her behind, he questioned whether she too felt the pang of loneliness as she dined alone tonight. Did she miss the presence of others, yearning for the warmth of companionship amidst the silence? Din had grown accustomed to solitude, but the quietude lacked the tranquility it once held before he met Grogu. Unlike himself, Bo-Katan didn't strike him as someone who found solace in being alone. Recalling their time in her castle on Kalevala, he couldn't shake the memory of her profound isolation and evident distress. He swiftly finished his meal and, once done, intentionally made a noise to signal his return to the cave. He didn't want to inadvertently catch Bo-Katan without her helmet, potentially cause her to violate the creed as she tried earnestly to integrate with his people. To his relief, Bo-Katan was already wearing her helmet upon his arrival. He settled on a rock nearby, watching the flames dance and flicker through his visor. Din couldn't help but wonder about the expression behind Bo-Katan's helmet as he turned to look at her. Was she feeling lonely during her solitary meal? Or perhaps concerned about their mission the following day? He wished he could discern her emotions or simply ask her, but he didn't want to overstep any boundaries. Instead, he opted to initiate a conversation. "Thank you," Din began, prompting Bo-Katan to turn her attention towards him. "For your help with Grogu today." "No problem," she replied simply. Silence lingered between them as they waited for their fellow Mandalorians to return. "Your kid," Bo-Katan began, drawing Din's attention. "He seems to really love you." Din was taken aback by her words. He hadn't expected Bo-Katan to acknowledge such sentiments, let alone express them so openly. Love wasn't a topic he had anticipated discussing with Bo-Katan. Yet here they were. Din knew Grogu was attached to him. Ahsoka said so before, but he hadn't realized the depth of the child's feelings. Was Grogu's love for him really that apparent, even to Bo-Katan? Din found himself at a loss for words. "He does?" he responded, his uncertainty palpable. Bo-Katan nodded as she turned her head to the fire. "The last time I saw him with you, he left you and went with the Jedi." Bo-Katan recalled that pivotal moment. "Yet, he returned to you, didn't he?" "Yes, he did," Din replied, his voice betraying the emotions swirling within him. He had feared he might never see Grogu again after the child left with the Jedi. Din had believed he could simply revert to his old life, but he was wrong. He couldn't let go of Grogu, and it seemed the feeling was mutual. "Then wasn't that love?" Bo-Katan asked. "Jedis aren't allowed to have attachments like that, but the kid chose you over that stupid council rule." Her disdain for the Jedi Council's attachment rule evident in her tone. Din shared Bo-Katan's sentiments about such restrictions. He had once believed that as a bounty hunter, he could live a life without attachments. However, he had come to realize that such a life was not only impossible, but also unfulfilling. "I knew a Jedi who fell in love with a Mandalorian," Bo-Katan mentioned unexpectedly, capturing Din's full attention. A Jedi and a Mandalorian in love? The notion of such seemingly opposite worlds intertwining romantically was a revelation to him. It was the first time he had encountered such a concept. The Jedi said the Mandalorian meant something to him, yet he didn't choose to be with her. He left her and chose his values over a life with her, and he regretted it deeply in the end, and so did the Mandalorian. Din stared at Bo-Katan's blank visor, sensing that the story was more than just a passing tale. It was evident that the story held deeper meaning for her, perhaps hinting at personal connections with the individuals involved. Yet he hesitated to probe further into details she seemed reluctant to divulge. The fact that she had shared the tale with him at all was surprising enough, and he respected her boundaries enough not to press for more. "So when I saw the little one tagging along with you when you visited me in Kalevala, Bo-Katan's voice trailed off, her emotions bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm glad that he chose you." "I'm glad too," Din replied, a genuine smile spreading beneath his helmet. "Thank you, Bo, for helping me rescue Grogu that day. I don't think I've ever properly thanked you for that, considering everything else that happened." Bo-Katan remained silent, tension briefly tightening her frame. Din realized he had addressed her familiarly, as if they were close enough to warrant such intimacy. It felt natural to him, but he worried he had overstepped. After all, they weren't even friends, were they? "I'm sorry, Din began, but Bo-Katan interrupted him. "It's fine, Din," she replied softly. "It's just been too long since I heard someone call me like that again." Once again, Din was reminded of Bo-Katan's solitude. She had been alone in her castle for 2 years or more, with no one to call her by name. It seemed evident to Din that Bo-Katan might be grappling with loneliness, a notion that resonated deeply with him. He considered whether her steadfast adherence to the tribe's ways was driven by a desire for companionship. While she could easily seek refuge on another planet, away from the covert's constraints, it dawned on him that perhaps solitude was a greater fear for her than inconvenience. Despite the restrictions imposed by Mandalorian tradition, this place offered her a sense of belonging and connection she might not find elsewhere. It was a trade-off she seemed willing to make, even if it meant sacrificing personal freedom for the sake of camaraderie. "Bo," Din's voice broke the silence, drawing Bo-Katan's attention as he cleared his throat. "We truly appreciate what you're doing for the tribe. The child wasn't your responsibility, yet you took the initiative to devise a strategy to save him. But you don't have to do this alone." Turning to face her, Din longed to see beyond the visor that obscured her expression. It was a promise, one he intended to uphold even if she strayed from the path he held dear. "You don't have to be alone, Bo." "Not anymore," he assured her, his words carrying a weight of sincerity. Their brief moment of connection was interrupted as their fellow Mandalorians began to return, signaling the end of their private exchange. Despite the interruption, Din's promise lingered in the air, a silent pledge of support and solidarity. Chapter 9. Saving Ragnar 2. Summary. Din's POV continuation for Episode 4, The Foundling. After Ragnar's rescue, Din found himself wanting to provide company for Bo, and as they become closer, the more his concern towards her happiness and safety grew. Alternative title. Din and Bo began being domestic. Things hadn't turned out exactly as Bo-Katan had planned. In the early morning hours, they began their ascent up the cliffs towards the raptor's nest, moving cautiously to avoid alerting the beast. Bo-Katan emphasized the importance of stealth, hoping that the creature hadn't yet devoured or begun digesting their quarry. Their climb proceeded smoothly, with no signs of the beast above. Din could sense they had chosen the optimal time for their approach. It appeared the creature was absent. As they drew near to the nest, Din discreetly caught Bo's attention. "Bo," he whispered, and she immediately turned to him. He signaled their proximity to the nest. Bo-Katan relayed to the team that absolute silence was imperative. They couldn't afford to take any chances. Upon reaching the top, the creature's nest, Din, Bo-Katan, and Paz scanned the area for any sign of the beast. Relief washed over them when they found none. "It's not here. Let's find the kid," Bo-Katan ordered. Din activated his visor sensors to detect any heat sources indicating the child's presence. He quickly identified one and pointed it out. "I see a heat source over there." Paz moved hastily towards the indicated spot despite Bo-Katan's attempt to stop him. They weren't surprised. Paz was known for his stubbornness, and this was his child they were rescuing. Din and Bo exchanged a glance, acknowledging that no amount of persuasion would sway Paz. They stood guard as Paz approached the heat source, calling out his son's name repeatedly. Din understood the desperation of wanting to save one's child. You'd risk anything for their safety. They were all startled when 3 mini raptors emerged instead of Ragnar. The heat source they had detected came from the beast's offspring. It wasn't Ragnar after all. As Din, Bo, and their companions moved to assist Paz, the mother beast, enraged, appeared, complicating matters further. Another furious single parent was the last thing they needed. Din and Bo took cover at the nest's edge as the beast growled in fury. They watched as it retrieved Ragnar, alive and unharmed, from its mouth. Relief flooded Din at the sight of the child, but the threat of him being eaten lingered. They needed to act swiftly to prevent a tragedy. Paz activated his jetpack to rescue his son, causing the beast to drop Ragnar but ensnaring Paz in its jaws. It then seized Ragnar with its claws as it soared into the air. Din and Bo, along with the rest of the team, activated their jetpacks, abandoning their plan to avoid using them or refraining from attacking the beast. Din noticed Bo was the first to approach the raptor's claw where Ragnar was held. She reached out her hand, echoing the words she had spoken to Din when she rescued him in the waters of Trask. Before Bo could reach the child, the raptor's wings struck her, sending her plummeting downward, her jetpack deactivating. "Bo!" Din screamed inwardly, moving to fly towards her. But before he could reach her, she reactivated her jetpack, soaring back into the air. Din breathed a sigh of relief, but he noticed something fall from Bo as she descended, though he wasn't sure what it was. With Bo safely back in action, Din focused on attacking the creature to save Paz and the kid. Bo utilized her lariat to attach herself to the beast's head, and her action seemed effective as the creature roared in pain, releasing Paz from its jaws. Paz landed on a nearby rock, his malfunctioning jetpack leaving him stranded for the moment. Their fellow Mandalorians launched a coordinated assault on the beast, targeting its eyes and wings. Din drew his knife and managed to strike the creature's wing, causing it to release Ragnar. As Bo attempted to grasp the child's hand, it slipped from her fingers. Din swiftly moved to intercept. catching Ragnar safely as he fell through the air. The creature tumbled into the waters below, where a larger sea monster emerged to devour it, neutralizing the threat. Din flew to Paz and handed Ragnar back to his father, who eagerly embraced him. "I'm okay, Dad," Ragnar reassured, nestled securely in Paz's arms. Relief flooded Din as he witnessed the reunion. Today hadn't unfolded as they'd hoped or expected, but they had achieved their mission, and that was success enough for them. "Thank you," Paz expressed his gratitude. Din hadn't anticipated being on the receiving end of Paz's thanks, considering their past disagreements. But ultimately, they were both Mandalorians, bound by shared values and a commitment to protecting their children. Din felt a sense of fulfillment in assisting Paz in retrieving his foundling, mirroring the help he had received in his own quest to rescue Grogu. They would always have each other's backs. "This is the way," Din affirmed. "This is the way," Paz echoed, acknowledging their shared path and commitment to their creed. Along with the others, they landed near Din, Paz, and Ragnar, awaiting their descent from the cliff. Their fellow Mandalorians quickly gathered around Ragnar, ensuring he was unharmed. Bo approached Din, though her visor remained on the child. "Did the kid sustain any injuries?" she inquired. "No, he's fine," Din replied, noting the deep sigh of relief she let out. His gaze drifted to her bare shoulder, where her pauldron was missing. He recalled seeing something fall from her as she was struck by the creature's wing. "The creature hit you, right? Are you injured?" "No, I'm fine, Din," Bo assured him. "Your pauldron came off." Bo glanced over her shoulder, seemingly unaware of the missing armor. "The armorer can craft you a new one when we return," Din suggested, and Bo nodded in acknowledgement. "We should return to the covert now. The sea creature that attacked the raptor may return," Paz proposed, and the group agreed. As they began to make their way toward the gauntlet, Din noticed Bo remained rooted to her spot, gazing up at the raptor's nest. "Bo?" Din called out, approaching her while the others paused, noticing their leader's hesitation. "Is something wrong?" "The raptor's children," Bo began, still fixated on the nest. "They're still up there." Din followed her gaze and heard the plaintive cries from above. The mother raptor they had slain had been trying to feed Ragnar to her offspring. They must be starving by now. "Isn't it creed not to leave orphan children behind?" Bo turned to Din. Din was taken aback. Since when had Bo shown such reverence for the creed? He had always thought she cared little for the traditions of their tribe. Yet here she was, reminding them of their duty to the creature's young. "Did I say something wrong, Din?" Bo's question pulled him from his thoughts. Din quickly shook his head. "No, what you said is true. We'll take them." The team collaborated to devise a plan to safely transport the 3 young raptors without risking harm to themselves. One of their fellow Mandalorians suggested using raw meat to coax the younglings into the gauntlet. The journey back to the covert was swift, their main priority being to secure the 3 raptor younglings before any chaos ensued within the gauntlet. Upon their arrival, the entire tribe awaited them outside, including the armorer and Grogu. Cheers erupted as Ragnar emerged from the gauntlet, safe and unharmed, bringing relief to all. As Din stepped out of the gauntlet with Bo close behind, he headed straight for Grogu. Lifting the child into his arms, Din felt like he's back home once again. "Bo-Katan, Kryze," the armorer's voice cut through the celebratory atmosphere. "You have brought honor to your house and all of Mandalore. You have fulfilled the highest honor of the creed. Saving a foundling." Din smiled beneath his helmet, pleased to see Bo receiving the recognition she deserved for her courageous actions. He hoped it would alter the tribe's perception of her, moving her beyond the confines of being a mere cautionary tale. "This is the way," Bo accepted the armorer's words. "This is the way," the armorer echoed. Bo proceeded to inform the armorer about the younglings they had rescued. The sight of the 3 offspring, who had nearly consumed their own kind, shocked everyone. However, with reassurance that the Shriek Hawk training team knew how to handle them, the younglings were entrusted into their care. Properly trained, they could become valuable assets to the tribe in the future. The armorer noticed Bo's missing pauldron and invited her to join her in crafting a new one. Din watched as Bo followed the armorer into the cave. He had anticipated hostility or indifference from the armorer towards Bo, considering what he had been taught about her, but he was relieved to see that wasn't the case. The armorer treated Bo kindly and offered her acknowledgments when due. Din was pleased to see Bo beginning to integrate with everyone in his tribe. As he observed Bo's interactions, Din couldn't help but wonder if she would consider staying and becoming a permanent part of their tribe. Would she embrace their ways and choose to spend her life in the covert? Din found himself hoping she would. He enjoyed learning more about her, something he wouldn't have the opportunity to do if she didn't stay at the first place. There was an inexplicable desire to get closer to her, to understand her better. He wanted to know the stories behind her scar, the people she mentioned last night, and why she hadn't challenged him for the saber. He wanted to be close enough for her to share what she saw when she rescued him in the living waters. He wanted to be close enough to convince her to stay a little longer. Grogu's babbling interrupted his thoughts, drawing his attention. The child seemed to be staring directly at him, as if peering into his deepest thoughts through his helmet. "What? Do you have something to say?" Din asked. But Grogu just giggled before turning away. Was he mocking him? But no, Grogu wouldn't do that. It must be fatigue from the mission clouding Din's mind, leading him to entertain strange thoughts. Perhaps what he truly needed was some rest. Moments later, the activity in the covert shifted towards dinner preparations. Grogu, already pestering Din for food, must have really missed their dinner together the previous night. Yet, Din hadn't seen Bo emerge from the cave yet. They usually shared meals before going their separate ways, and Bo might come looking for him once she emerged. "I know you're hungry," Din reassured his son, who continued to express his hunger eagerly. "But let's wait for Bo, all right? We're the only ones she knows here, so we have to be there for her." Grogu babbled in agreement, nodding his little head. It didn't take long for Bo to finally emerge from the covert. Din's attention was immediately drawn to the shiny new pauldron adorning her right shoulder, complete with what seemed to be the mythosaur signet attached. He was certainly intrigued by it. Grogu cheered upon seeing her, prompting Din to wonder if his excitement stemmed from seeing Bo or the prospect of food. Perhaps both. The little one dashed towards Bo, capturing her attention instantly. Bo then turned towards Din and Grogu, approaching them and gathering Grogu in her arms. "What are you two still doing here? I thought you would have gone to dinner already." "We were just about to," Din replied. "We're waiting for you." "Oh, I see." Bo nodded in acknowledgement, though Din noticed a hint of unease in her demeanor. Had the armorer said something to upset her? "Are you all right, Bo?" Din asked cautiously. "Yes," Bo responded quickly, though Din remained unconvinced. "I'm just hungry and tired. What do we have for dinner?" Din decided not to press further, respecting her privacy. He was curious about the sudden shift in her mood, but he would wait until Bo felt comfortable enough to confide in him. "I can fetch some meat rations from the covert's food storage," Din suggested. "Actually, I was thinking of cooking something," Bo said, eliciting excitement from Grogu. "I have some dehydrated ingredients in my ship for Pog soup. Can we come help?" Din offered. While they couldn't dine with her, he wanted to offer companionship in preparing their meal. "Of course, I'd be glad to have you too," Bo replied, her enthusiasm noticeably higher than when she had emerged from the covert. It was a relief to see her mood lifting. Din stood beside Bo, assisting her in preparing the Pog soup. He was curious to learn the intricacies of this Mandalorian delicacy, hoping to replicate it for Grogu in the future. The child eagerly awaited the dish, sitting on his pram nearby, engrossed in playing with his shifter ball using his force powers. The atmosphere felt surprisingly natural and peaceful to Din. Bo mixed spices in the pan while he skillfully cut rehydrated vegetables with his blade. It reminded him of the scenes from his childhood home in Akfatina, where his parents would cook together and he would eagerly anticipate the meal. They would sit at the table sharing food and laughter. It had been a while since Din had reminisced about the happy memories with his parents, rather than the haunting ones that often plagued him. The Gauntlet's kitchen was cozy, bringing Din and Bo closer together. Their pauldrons almost touched, and their arms occasionally brushed against each other. Din felt a strange sensation, like electricity coursing through him. It was a feeling he couldn't quite explain, but it made him remarkably comfortable in Bo's presence. "Have you ever tried cooking before?" Bo suddenly inquired as she stirred the soup in the pot. "I usually don't cook," Din replied as he continued cutting the vegetables. "Grogu and I often eat out, but if I have time I just whip up ready-made meals that I can heat up. That's not a very healthy option for a growing child, you know," Bo remarked, and Din nodded in agreement. Cooking had never been his forte. Before Grogu he hadn't seen the need to learn since meals were merely sustenance to him. As long as he could fill his stomach, it was sufficient. Taste and health were secondary. However, now that he had a child to care for, he understood that providing healthy and enjoyable meals was part of his responsibility as a father. "I know. Maybe you could teach me how to whip up some Mandalorian dishes I can make for him," Din suggested. "I would be honored to introduce some Mandalorian meals to you," Bo replied warmly. "How about you?" Din asked, finishing cutting the vegetables and handing them to Bo. "Have you always liked cooking?" "I often cooked for my night owls before. Whenever we made camp, Casca and I would prepare hot meals to warm us up in the cold weather," Bo reminisced, her voice tinged with nostalgia as she spoke of her fellow night owls. She seemed close to them, and Din couldn't imagine the pain it must have caused her when they all turned their backs on her. "After they left, cooking lost its appeal, so I guess I just heated up food instead." "I see," Din replied simply. Silence fell between them until Bo spoke again. "Did Grogu have a favorite food?" Shifting the conversation to focus on Grogu immediately lifted the heavy atmosphere after Bo mentioned her night owls. "As long as it's food, I think he'll eat it," Din answered, making Bo chuckle. "But I think he likes frogs." "Frogs?" "Yes, frogs. He often eats one almost half his size in just one bite," Din told her, and Bo turned to look at the child behind them, still innocently playing with his ball. She seemed incredulous that such a tiny being could devour a frog in one bite. "He could swallow a whole frog in just one bite," Bo exclaimed in disbelief. "He also eats them alive," Din continued, recalling a memory with amusement. "I remember him eating a lot of frog eggs from the frog lady we accompanied to Trask." "He did?" Bo asked, still surprised. "Yes, he kept eating them. Thankfully, he didn't finish every single egg until we reached Trask, but the egg supply had significantly decreased by the time we arrived at our destination." Bo laughed heartily at Din's account of that day. "He's such a little menace." "That he was," Din agreed, chuckling along. Their conversation was interrupted by a babbling noise from Grogu. They turned to see him, his eyes narrowing in frustration. "It's almost done, all right," Din reassured his kid. "Maybe in the future, I could look up some frog dishes," Bo suggested quietly. "He would love that for sure." Din agreed with a smile. Din carefully poured the steaming soup into their respective mugs, mindful of the warmth that radiated from the pot. He knew it was almost time for him and Grogu to depart the gauntlet, so Bo could enjoy her meal without the constraints of her helmet. Yet, despite the impending departure, he felt a sense of hesitation to leave Bo alone for dinner. "Do you want some company for dinner?" Din offered, his tone carrying a hint of concern. "We aren't allowed to eat when other people are around, right?" Bo responded. "But I often eat with Grogu," Din explained. "It's fine as long as we only lift our helmets to our mouths. Since this is soup, it wouldn't be difficult to eat even with the helmet on." Bo considered his words for a moment, acknowledging the practicality of his suggestion. "Oh, you have a point. But if you want to lift your helmet completely, that would be fine too. Grogu and I could leave," Din added, wanting to ensure Bo felt comfortable with her decision. "No," Bo replied quickly, her response swift yet followed by a slight clearing of her throat. "It's fine if you stay. I would appreciate the company." "We appreciate yours too," Din said warmly, offering a reassuring smile she couldn't see as he settled into his usual place in Bo's gauntlet. The three of them began to eat their meal, the warmth of the soup providing comfort in the snuggly atmosphere of the gauntlet. As Din savored each spoonful, surrounded by the presence of Grogu and Bo, he couldn't help but feel a profound sense of belonging. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in ages, reminiscent of the warmth that only reminds him of home. Chapter 10. Push and Pull. Summary. Din's POV continuation. Pre-episode 5. Din finds himself unable to shake off the persistent contemplation of his deepening connection with Bo. They seem caught in a perpetual cycle of tension, comfort, and distance. The looming possibility of her departure only intensifies his inner turmoil, making it increasingly challenging for him to discern his position in their evolving relationship. Despite his best efforts, he realizes that he can't prevent their bond from growing even deeper. A week and days had passed since Ragnar's rescue, and Din, Grogu, along with Bo, had settled into a routine in the covert. Each morning, Din and Bo engaged in training sessions with the foundlings, focusing especially on Grogu. Following breakfast together in the gauntlet, Din commenced teaching Grogu survival skills such as building fires and setting up camp, as well as combat techniques, while Bo instructed Grogu in the handling of weapons and firearms. They would then share lunch and spend the afternoon guarding the covert together. Din and Bo would often cook dinner together, which they enjoyed in the gauntlet. After dinner, Din and Grogu bid Bo good night, before retiring to one of the covert's quarters for the night. There were also days when Bo taught Din to wield the dark saber. Though he had not yet mastered it, it somehow felt a little lighter in his grip. Bo echoed the same advice that the armorer had given him about the weapon, emphasizing that he shouldn't fight it. She encouraged him to ponder not just how to use it, but why. Why is he fighting? The wielder's mind should be clear about his goals while using the weapon. As they spent more time together, their bond grew stronger, almost becoming inseparable. Their fellow covert Mandalorians couldn't help but notice their closeness, including Paz Vizsla. "You seem close with Bo-Katan, Kryze," Paz observed, about a week after rescuing Ragnar from the raptors. "That makes sense," Din replied. It was night, and he and Grogu had just finished dinner with Bo. "We're the only ones she knows here, and I brought her here, so it's my responsibility to look after her." Although Bo had managed to find some companionship among the other Mandalorians in the covert, she was often seen predominantly with Din. Naturally, others couldn't help but inquire about their relationship. Din couldn't deny that it was unusual for him to be seen in such close proximity to someone. His fellow Mandalorians knew him as a loner. Despite being part of the covert, he rarely interacted with others. He was perceived as distant and aloof, preferring solitude. Therefore, witnessing him willingly spending time with someone else might have felt surreal for them. But it was equally surreal for Din. On the day he first met Bo, Din never imagined that their relationship would deepen to this extent. Enjoying each other's company, cooking, sharing meals, and training Grogu together, Bo appeared as a stark contrast to Din, prompting him to initially harbor doubts about the possibility of forging a deep bond with her. However, being with her proved surprisingly effortless. It had been a considerable time since he had allowed someone to enter his inner circle to this degree. The feeling of comfort, warmth, and refreshment was unfamiliar yet welcomed. He used to keep people at arm's length, maintaining a cautious distance. But Bo was unlike anyone he'd encountered before. In her presence, he experienced a rare tranquility, as if an inexplicable force were gently pulling him towards her. In the past, had he been the Din of old, he would have instinctively raised his defenses. Yet now he hesitated, realizing the futility of resisting the pull towards Bo. It felt inevitable, their connection growing stronger with each passing moment they were together. "Din Djarin, may I have a word with you?" The armorer's unexpected call halted him just as he was about to enter the covert to return the weapons used in the foundling's training. Once he ensured that Grogu was with Bo, Din followed the armorer into the quarters where the forge stood. "Is something amiss?" Din inquired. "You and Bo-Katan Kryze appear to have grown close," the armorer remarked. It wasn't surprising that she had noticed it too, but Din hadn't anticipated her bringing it up. It seemed the armorer had no qualms with Bo, though. "What sort of relationship do you share with her?" "She is a companion of mine," Din replied simply. "A friend. A friendly companionship, I see." The armorer's tone remained neutral, devoid of any hint of emotion as she resumed preparations to forge another piece of armor. Minutes passed in silence as Din waited for further conversation. the only sounds filling the air the clanking of metal being shaped into what appeared to be a pauldron. Assuming their discussion had concluded, Din began to turn away. "Has she confided in you about what she witnessed in the living waters?" The armorer's sudden question stopped Din in his tracks, prompting him to turn back towards her. The topic of the living waters had never arisen in Din's conversations with Bo. She often spoke fondly of her time with the night owls, particularly reminiscing about her father, whom she revered. However, on more personal matters, Din sensed that Bo maintained her guard, and he respected her privacy in that regard, just as she respected his privacy to his own personal matters as well. "She did inquire if I spotted anything alive in the waters when she had already pulled me to safety," Din replied. "She never divulged what she witnessed," the armorer persisted. "No, she didn't," Din confirmed. The armorer turned to face him, her visor fixed directly on him. "I suppose I overestimated the depth of your bond with her. I believed you two were close enough for her to confide in you about such a significant matter." Din felt a pang of bewilderment. The armorer's words seemed to strike a chord within him, stirring a sense of inadequacy. It was as if her observation highlighted the distance he had yet to traverse and the barriers he had yet to overcome. Despite the shared experiences and moments of intimacy he had with Bo, Din couldn't shake off the lingering doubts. Perhaps he wasn't as close to her as others assumed, or as he himself had presumed. Yet as he grappled with these feelings, he found himself questioning whether maintaining some degree of distance was the safer choice. Would it not mitigate the pain of her eventual departure, the inevitable end of their journey together? Yet even as he wrestled with these uncertainties, Din recognized the importance of respecting Bo's autonomy. Who was he to restrain her if she chose to walk away? And if she opted to keep certain aspects of her life guarded, regardless of their significance, did it truly diminish the depth of their bond? "I respect her choices in what she chooses to share with me," Din stated firmly. The armorer regarded him for a moment before conceding with a simple, "This is the way." "This is the way," Din echoed. As Din stepped out of the forge, his gaze immediately fell upon Bo and Grogu, nestled on the sandy ground. Bo was deeply engaged in teaching Grogu to wield the Force, tossing a rock into the air for him to catch, their shared laughter drifting softly across the dunes. Watching their playful exchange from a distance, Din couldn't help but acknowledge the profound bond that had blossomed not only between himself and Bo, but also between Bo and Grogu. It was evident in Grogu's ease and contentment in her presence, even to the extent of preferring to sleep beside her on the gauntlet, rather than with Din on some days. Though occasional pangs of jealousy and betrayal surfaced within Din at the speed with which Grogu had grown close to Bo, he understood the magnetic allure she held for the child. Bo exuded a charisma that effortlessly resonated with those she deemed worthy of her trust, and Din found himself both honored and elated to be part of that select circle. However, even amidst his happiness, Din couldn't shake the concern for Grogu's reaction when Bo eventually decided to depart from the covert. It was apparent to Din that this was the first time Grogu had truly found comfort and excitement in someone else's company aside from him. The weight of this realization pressed heavily on Din's mind as he observed them, fully aware that their beautiful bond would inevitably lead to heartache when the time came for them to part ways. As Din approached the pair, it was Grogu who first noticed him and squealed excitedly, pointing in his direction to Bo, who then turned to acknowledge him. "What are you two up to?" Din asked as he settled down in the sand beside them. "We're playing catch," Bo replied, "and Grogu's doing a very good job." Grogu babbled happily at Bo's compliment, and Din gently patted his head. "Great job, kid." Grogu then pointed to the sand, and it seemed like Din already knew what his child wanted. "All right, you can play for a while," Din relented, "but don't wander too far. Just stay where we can see you." Grogu waddled over to the shore, eagerly gathering shells. Din and Bo shared a chuckle as Grogu attempted to nibble on a shell, only to express annoyance through his babbling when he couldn't bite it, and promptly tossed it back onto the sand in frustration. "Your kid really seems to have a knack for using the Force," Bo commented as both Din and she watched Grogu playing in the sand. Of course, he trained with Skywalker for 2 years. Seems like he learned a lot during that time, Din explained, and Bo nodded in return. Ahsoka told me you visited Grogu, Bo said, fidgeting with her gloves. You didn't get to see each other at that time, though. That's right, Din replied, swallowing the emotions rising in his chest as he recalled that moment. I really wanted to see him and for him to see me, but it would have just made it harder for both of us if we had. It would have been tough to leave and say goodbye again. Yeah, but parting ways without a word didn't make it any easier for either of you, did it? Bo's question hung in the air, stirring the depths of Din's contemplation. I guess not, Din replied, his gaze distant as memories of their separation resurfaced. The weight of the N1 in his hands, its engines humming with the promise of departure, echoed the heavy ache in his heart. Thoughts of Grogu consumed him during the lonely hyperspace journey that followed. Merely catching a glimpse of his child wasn't enough to quell the longing that gnawed at him. Din yearned to hold Grogu close, to offer his gift of Beskar personally, to feel the warmth of their bond once more. Yet, as he navigated the complexities of their connection, Din understood that giving into that desire might only make it harder to bid Grogu farewell once more. Bo turned to Din, seeming to choose her words carefully before speaking again. But in the end, the galaxy still brought him back to you, she said, her voice carrying reassurance that resonated deep within Din's soul. Because he belongs with you. You are his father. Din met Bo's gaze, feeling a surge of gratitude for her understanding and affirmation. You're right. Are you considering making it official? Bo's inquiry cut through the stillness, prompting Din to pause and reflect. Since Grogu's return, the idea of formalizing their bond had lingered in his thoughts. Yet the weight of such a decision loomed large, requiring careful consideration of the responsibilities and implications it entailed. Din understood that while Grogu was unequivocally his son in his heart, to others he remained a foundling, not yet officially recognized as Din's own. Apart from Bo, no one else acknowledged Grogu as his son. Of course, but for now I'm waiting for the right moment to do it, Din replied. And when is that right moment? Bo pressed. Din's response came after a moment of contemplation, his voice carrying a solemn determination. When I'm fully confident that I can fulfill the role of being his father, to be a good father to him. You already are, Din. Bo's reassurance washed over him like a gentle tide. If you weren't, the kid wouldn't have returned to you. A flicker of gratitude crossed Din's features, hidden beneath his helmet, as he absorbed Bo's unwavering faith in him. Thank you, Bo, he said, the sincerity of his words echoing in the space between them. Bo's response was a simple nod, yet Din couldn't help but sense the warmth of a smile beneath her own helmet. They continued to watch Grogu play in the sand, laughing like the child he was meant to be. He knew that Grogu deserved a childhood free from the burdens of strife and battle. And so, he embraced his role as a protector and guide, dedicated to preserving the innocence and wonder that Grogu represented. Din found not only a son, but a beacon of hope, a reminder that amidst the chaos of the galaxy, there was still goodness to be cherished and protected, and he would do whatever it took to ensure that Grogu's light continued to shine bright. This is actually not so bad, Bo suddenly spoke, drawing Din's attention. What is? He asked, intrigued by the shift in her tone. I always thought I was made for war, Bo replied, her gloved hand fidgeting. I was raised to believe that war was my purpose, and it's all I've known. I never realized I craved peace like this until now, she continued, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I found myself hoping that war isn't the only thing I'm good at. You're not just about war, Bo, Din interjected, his tone firm yet reassuring. You cook delicious food, you're great with Grogu, and you've saved my life countless times. You're a reliable friend, and we're truly happy to have you here. Bo met his gaze, and Din felt something he couldn't quite explain. It was as if he wanted to reach out and hold Bo's hand, noticing how she clenched her own hand as she turned to look at him. He sensed something developing between them, yet he couldn't find the words to define it, or perhaps he was simply afraid to acknowledge it. The feeling was all too familiar. It mirrored what he had experienced on Sorgan. Once again, he found himself drawn to someone in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. Their moment was interrupted by Grogu's squeal, breaking the spell of their longing gazes. Bo cleared her throat and rose from her seat, her movements breaking the tension that had enveloped them. "Well then, I'm just going to head to the gauntlet and use the fresher," she announced, her voice betraying a hint of awkwardness. "Okay," Din replied, masking the twinge of sadness that tugged at his heart. "I guess we'll see you at dinner." "Yeah," Bo responded softly, her hand gently patting Grogu's head before she turned and made her way toward the gauntlet. Din's gaze lingered on her retreating form as he sighed deeply. It was a familiar pattern that had emerged between them, a delicate balance of intimacy and distance. In moments of vulnerability, they would open up to each other, sharing their innermost thoughts and feelings freely. But just as swiftly as the connection deepened, they would retreat behind their emotional walls once more, as if performing a carefully choreographed dance of push and pull. Recalling the armorer's observations about their relationship, Din realized that there was still much he didn't know about Bo, just as she remained unaware of many aspects of his past. It was understandable for Bo to be guarded. The scars of past betrayals lingered, leaving her wary of opening up fully. Similarly, Din had learned to keep his own counsel, his trust hard-earned and rarely given. And yet, despite their shared reticence, there was an undeniable bond that was already forged between them, a silent understanding that transcended words and defied explanation. In the grand scheme of things, Bo's departure might not appear as a significant loss in Din's life. After all, he had plenty of companions: Grogu, his covert grief, Cara, Paley, people he could rely on in times of need. But Bo was different. She wasn't merely an ally or a trusted confidant. She was Bo. She was the person with whom he felt truly at ease, the one he could share light-hearted banter and laughter with, the one he longed to offer reassurance and solace to. She had effortlessly woven her way into his thoughts and emotions, becoming a cherished presence in his life. She was the individual, aside from Grogu, he cared for deeply and wished above all else to see content and fulfilled. These thoughts continued to plague Din as he attempted to drift off to sleep that night. Despite his efforts to force himself into slumber, he remained wide awake. Eventually, he gave up and decided to take a walk. After adjusting Grogu's blanket, he left their quarters. To his surprise, he found Bo sitting inside the forge. His eyes caught her the moment he passed through the entryway of the covert. She seemed completely engrossed in examining her new, shiny pauldron she held in her hands. Din noticed her heavy sigh as she continued to fidget with the armor. Uncertain whether to give her space or to accompany her, Din hesitated. Before he could decide, Bo turned to him, apparently sensing his presence. "Are you just going to stand there, Din?" she asked. "I didn't want to disturb you," he replied. "You're not," Bo reassured him, patting the space beside her. Din accepted her invitation and took the seat beside her. Bo then reattached the pauldron to her shoulder. Din couldn't help but be curious about her choice of the new pauldron. They hadn't had the chance to discuss it before. "Did the armorer run out of blue paint?" Din quipped. "Or did the blue paint here not match your armor's color?" Bo chuckled softly, understanding his jest. "Oh no. I just wanted to leave it unpainted, that's all." "Why is that?" Din inquired further, genuinely curious. "Why? Are you the only Mandalorian allowed to do that?" Bo countered. "Then you're saying you copied me?" Din teased back, a hint of amusement coloring his tone. Bo seemed momentarily caught off guard. She turned away from Din, searching for the right words. "Why would I copy you?" "I don't know. Why would you?" Din pressed on, a smirk playing on his lips. "Maybe because it looked cool," Bo replied. "Does that mean I look cool?" Din teased, enjoying their banter. "Getting cocky now, are we?" Bo teased in return, her voice light and playful. Din found himself chuckling, grateful for the light-hearted moment shared between them. It seemed that in the company of Grogu and Bo, laughter came more easily. "Then the mythosaur," Din continued, his tone light yet probing. "Did you choose that as a signet because it looked cool too?" Bo's laughter abruptly ceased, catching Din off guard. Concern crept into his voice as he reached out to her. sensing her sudden shift in demeanor. "What? Are you all right, Bo?" he asked, his worry palpable. She seemed to shake off whatever had momentarily consumed her, her walls swiftly rising once more. "Ah, yes, sorry," she replied, her response guarded. Din felt a pang of disappointment as he observed Bo retreating behind her defenses once again. He couldn't help but yearn for a deeper connection with her. Despite his own tendencies to keep others at arm's length, a part of him longed to break down the barriers that stood between them, to forge a bond built on trust and vulnerability. One reason Din hesitated to accept Omera's offer to stay on Sorgan was his fear of forming attachments only to endure eventual loss. Allowing people into his life wasn't easy. Accepting Grogu and recognizing him as part of his soul took Din a considerable amount of time to grasp. Had they not parted ways, he might never have fully comprehended the depth of his connection with the child. However, what he's feeling now is somehow distinct from what he felt for Omera and Grogu. Din now understands that Bo has become immensely significant to him, a truth he's willing to acknowledge. Despite their rocky beginning, she has naturally integrated into his everyday life since joining the covert, as if she were meant to be there, filling a void he hadn't realized existed. Din couldn't bear the thought of losing her without fully acknowledging her importance. Hence, he refused to take their time together at the covert for granted. Din's attention drifted to the forge, the armorer's enigmatic words echoing in his mind. "The armorer asked to see me earlier," he said, breaking the quiet between them. "She mentioned that you saw something in the living waters." She didn't elaborate further. Bo took a moment before responding softly. "Yes, I did see something." "Listen, Bo," Din began, turning towards her, but she lowered her gaze. "I'm not upset that you haven't told me what it is, and I won't pressure you to do so." Bo then looked up, her visor meeting his. "When you're ready, you can share it with me. I'll be patient." He hoped his words conveyed the depth of his understanding and support. Though their relationship was complex and undefined, marked by moments of ease mixed with awkwardness, Din wanted Bo to know that he would always stand by her. Regardless of her decision, he would remain steadfast at her side, offering his unwavering loyalty and support. "I'll make sure you won't be waiting for long," Bo assured him, her smile evident in her voice. "Well then, let's head to sleep. We have morning training sessions tomorrow," Din said, rising from his seat. Suddenly, tension gripped his heart, making it difficult to breathe for a moment. Perhaps he needed some fresh air. "Wait, Din," Bo stopped him. "Can we sit here for a while? I'm still not sleepy." Din couldn't bring himself to refuse Bo, so he relented and remained seated beside her. He even scooted a little closer, their pauldrons touching. It felt strange to have someone in such close proximity, but with Bo it felt entirely natural, as if Bo belonged by his side. Moments later, as they lingered in comfortable silence, Din sensed Bo's head gently resting against his pauldron. He called her name softly, but she remained still, lost in slumber. The thought of carrying her back to the gauntlet so she could rest in her ship's cabin crossed Din's mind. However, a sudden wave of weariness washed over him, sapping his energy. He also didn't want to risk disturbing Bo's sleep. A smile crept onto Din's lips as he admired how peaceful and content Bo seemed to feel in his presence. Despite her helmet concealing her face, he could imagine her with closed eyes and strands of red hair falling across her features. An impulse to brush them aside tugged at him, though he knew Bo couldn't remove her helmet without compromising her Mandalorian identity. It was a pity, he mused. As Din felt his eyes grow heavy, he didn't realize he had slipped into slumber until it enveloped him completely. Their helmets leaned towards each other, their breaths synchronizing. Morning arrived, and it was Grogu who woke them both up. If the armorer happened to visit during the night and saw them sleeping peacefully, heads leaned close together, she made no mention of it. Chapter 11. Navarro's Call for Help. Summary. Din and Bo continue to rely on each other as another battle demands their attention. Din's POV on the first part of Episode 5. The Pirates. Din was assisting his fellow Mandalorians in gathering the weapons the foundlings had used during their training session. Nearby, Grogu played with the other children, his laughter mingling with theirs. Din was relieved that today's training had concluded without any unwelcome creatures or monsters interrupting their activities. However, he knew they couldn't afford to be complacent, so everyone remained vigilant. He hoped that someday they wouldn't have to worry about such threats and could focus solely on training the foundlings, instead of constantly being anxious about their safety. For now, though, this hidden enclave was the only place where they could remain undetected, and Din found a measure of contentment here, despite the constant danger. The harsh environment was made bearable by the camaraderie and resilience of his fellow Mandalorians, two of them in particular. Things could always be better, but they could also be much worse. As Din gathered the last of the training weapons, he smiled beneath his helmet, watching Bo-Katan walk towards him. "You need some help?" Bo-Katan asked, her voice carrying a note of amusement. "I could definitely use some," Din replied, nodding towards the crates he still had to take inside the covert. Bo-Katan stepped forward, grabbing one of the crates, and together they walked towards the covert, their paces naturally falling in sync. "I was thinking of cooking something for dinner later," Din mentioned casually. Bo-Katan turned her visor to him quickly, a hint of surprise in her stance. "You? Cooking?" She chuckled softly. "What, you don't think I can?" Din replied, a playful challenge in his voice. "Sure, but let's hope you don't set the gauntlet on fire." Bo teased, her tone light. "I'll try my best," Din reassured her, a smile evident in his voice despite the helmet hiding his expression. "That's not very reassuring, Din," Bo-Katan countered, lowering the crate she was carrying. "What do you plan to make anyway?" "A specialty from Akvatina," Din replied, a nostalgic tone in his voice. Memories of his homeworld's delicacies flooded his mind, particularly how his mother used to prepare them. He wanted both Grogu and Bo to experience a piece of his past through the food he loved. "Akivatina?" Bo turned to him, curiosity evident. "How did you know about that dish?" "Before I became a Mandalorian foundling, I was born and raised on Akivatina," Din explained. "Really?" Bo asked in disbelief. "My father and I visited that planet once, maybe twice if I remember correctly, though I don't recall much from those trips. I was quite young then, but wouldn't it be amazing if we had met back then?" "Yeah," Din replied with a smile, his thoughts drifting to the possibility. He wondered how different things might have been if their paths had crossed earlier. Would they have somehow found their way to each other sooner? Despite the musings, Din felt a deep sense of gratitude for the present moment, knowing that fate had brought them together, even if it was later than he might have wished. As Bo and Din began to walk back outside the covert to fetch the remaining crates, they were interrupted by a sudden commotion. Children, including Grogu, came rushing inside, followed by the hurried footsteps of their fellow Mandalorians, some of whom were grabbing blasters. "What happened?" Bo inquired, concern lacing her voice as the commotion escalated. "Did another beast or raptor snatch a child?" Din presumed, his mind racing to the potential dangers. "No," one of their fellow Mandalorians replied. "An X-Wing just entered the atmosphere and is preparing to land near the covert. It seems to be owned by someone from the New Republic." "What?" Bo and Din exclaimed simultaneously, exchanging surprised glances. "The New Republic knows this covert exists?" Bo asked. "No, our location is strictly concealed from those outside the covert," Din replied, a note of concern creeping into his tone. "But if it's someone from the New Republic, I may have an idea who it is." He hoped his assumption was correct, knowing the individual wouldn't pose a threat. "Who? And how did they discover our location?" Bo pressed. "I'll find out," Din replied, his demeanor cautious as he stepped outside, gesturing for Grogu to remain where he was along with the other foundlings. Bo followed closely behind, her grip tightening on her blaster as they ventured out to confront the unexpected visitor. It was Paz Vizsla who first approached the unannounced intruder. Din heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing the familiar voice of an ally. As he stepped outside, he saw that his assumption was correct. It was indeed Captain Carson Teva. However, Din wondered how the New Republic captain had found their covert. Surely Teva wasn't looking for the covert, but for him, specifically. Was it a serious matter? "How did you manage to find us?" Din asked, stepping into the light towards the New Republic captain. Mandalorians pride ourselves on our secrecy. Fortunately, someone I served with in the rebellion is amongst your ranks, Teva replied. A rebel? Din racked his brain trying to figure out who it could be. Bo? That couldn't be. She won't betray him nor their covert like that. But then he heard familiar beeps as his R5 droid stepped forward, revealing itself as the culprit. Thanks, R5. Teva acknowledged the droid. Din stopped himself from groaning in frustration. This was why he didn't trust droids. The entire covert will now have to relocate, Din concluded with a resigned sigh. Or we could kill him, Paz suggested darkly. Stay right here. Din turned to Paz, then to Bo, who was already reaching for her blasters. This man cut me a break once and now I'm returning the favor. Din quickly defended Teva before Paz could carry out his threat. Clear out, Blue. Greef Karga sent this hollow message. As Teva reached for his pocket to retrieve the hollow message device, Din's fellow Mandalorians tensed, raising their weapons and blasters towards him, ready to fire at the slightest hint of danger. Din, trusting the New Republic captain, held his ground, signaling for his comrades to stand down. Bo followed his lead, lowering her blasters and watching Teva carefully. Teva, moving slowly to avoid any misunderstandings, retrieved the device and tossed it to Din. Paz and the others, seeing the situation de-escalate, lowered their weapons but remained vigilant. Navarro is under siege by pirates. He's asking for help, Teva relayed. Din's mind immediately conjured an image of the likely culprits. He recalled the altercation he and Greef Karga had encountered in Navarro with some of Gorian Shard's pirates. It seemed they were still holding a grudge over what had transpired. The situation must be dire if Karga had reached out to the New Republic for help, knowing he had always been averse to involving himself with another bureaucracy. Din turned to Bo, trying to gauge her thoughts. He wished he could read her expression through her helmet. Bo could undoubtedly assist him in helping Karga in Navarro, but he wasn't sure if she would undertake such a mission. Karga was his friend, not hers. It wasn't her responsibility to join him in such a dangerous endeavor. She wasn't involved in this, and Din didn't want to ask any more of her than he already had. Din walked towards Teva, intending to escort him back to his ship and extract more information. Why are you really here? He asked, suspicion lacing his voice. They're about to blow Navarro to hell, Teva replied as they started to walk away from the covert. Then call in a strike, Din said, knowing that while he was willing to help Karga, he couldn't take on all of Shard's pirates alone. We don't even have ships. Coruscant doesn't care. Of course they don't. Din rolled his eyes and let out a disappointed sigh. What were they expecting from them anyway? Karga is your friend, Teva pressed. You won't let him die. That was a given. Din owed Karga a lot. He wouldn't let him die or allow all his hard work in rebuilding Navarro into a respectable place to live, rather than a haven for bounty hunters, go to waste. There was no question that he would help. The real issue was how to do it with their limited resources. What's in it for you? Din asked Teva. The New Republic needs to know that the Empire is growing again. This made Din halt his steps as they finally reached the X-Wing. And you think the Pirate King has something to do with it? What could be their connection to the Empire? Teva sighed and shook his head. I can't say for sure, but something doesn't smell right. Din agreed. This might be more than just revenge against Greef. He then remembered what happened to Bo's fortress on Kalevala. Could it be more than an act of vengeance against Bo as well? Look, it's not your fight, Teva stated. I just came to tell you that your friend is in danger and I thought you should know. Right. What mattered at the moment was not determining whether the Empire was behind all the recent events affecting Din's friends and allies. He had to focus on devising a plan to aid Karga and the people of Navarro. Discovering who was behind this and why could wait until after they dealt with the immediate crisis. Teva began to board his ship as Din heard Bo's footsteps approaching. She stood by his side, both of them watching as Teva prepared to lift off. I know you'll relocate anyway, Teva said. But you have my word. I will not reveal your location. Sorry to intrude. Din trusted Teva and wasn't worried about anyone discovering their whereabouts. His mind, however, was consumed with worry for Karga's current situation. Din and Bo watched as Teva lifted the X-Wing and flew away from their covert. So what are you thinking? Bo asked. He's right, Din replied, looking at the hollow message device. I gotta help the guy. With the New Republic uninterested in assisting, Din knew he was Karga's only hope, but he had no idea where to start. He couldn't just waltz into Navarro on his N1. It would be a death sentence. Despite his skills, he would have to contend with pirates on the ground and Shard's ship in the air. You can't do it alone, Bo said, as if knowing exactly the worries running deep in Din's mind. I know, Din replied. I'll join you, Bo volunteered. Din hesitated. He didn't want to burden Bo with his own troubles, but he also knew he needed her help. She was a brilliant strategist, and he was confident that she could devise a plan free Navarro. Still, he wasn't sure if the two of them alone could overcome such a large number of enemies. He glanced at their fellow Mandalorians, now retreating back inside the covert since the immediate threat had passed. Suddenly, an idea struck him, though he wasn't certain if it could become a reality. If I asked for the covert's help, Din began, turning back to Bo, do you think they would assist us? I think we would have a great chance to defeat the enemies if they did, Bo replied. We can convince them to help us. We. The word gave Din a sense of relief. He wasn't alone in this fight. He had Bo by his side supporting him and ready to stand with him. And if the covert decides not to help us? Din couldn't erase the doubt from his mind. Karga didn't have a good reputation with the covert after what had happened in Navarro, and some members didn't know him well enough to care about him or the planet. It would take a lot of convincing to get them to join the mission, but Din understood that he had to try. They needed all the help they could get. Then we'll devise a plan that might work, even if it's just the two of us, Bo replied. Din nodded, hoping to convey his immense gratitude to Bo for standing by his side and joining a fight that wasn't even hers. After Din concluded his speech, explaining to his fellow Mandalorians why they should aid Greef Karga and the people of Navarro, he handed the armorer's hammer back to her. He hoped his words had been persuasive enough to rally their support. To further incentivize them, Din mentioned Greef's offer of land. Although the offer had initially been extended to him alone, he proposed that if they liberated Navarro with the covert's assistance, Greef might extend the invitation to all of his people. Navarro could become a sanctuary where the foundlings could be raised and trained, a place where they could thrive and continue their traditions. Public speaking was not something Din was accustomed to. He had always believed Bo-Katan excelled in addressing crowds, her voice carrying an authority he felt he couldn't muster, though he would have preferred to ask her to speak on his behalf. Bo-Katan didn't share his personal bond with Karga. This was his burden to bear, and he had to speak for himself. The weight of his responsibility made him incredibly nervous. Even after finishing his speech, a heavy feeling of uncertainty lingered in his chest. He wasn't sure if he had done enough. Din then approached where Bo was sitting and took a seat closely beside her, just as they had that night when they fell asleep leaning on each other, their arms and pauldrons touching. In her presence, Din's nervousness and anxieties dissipated, replaced by a profound sense of ease and comfort. It's up to them now, he quietly said to Bo, the anxiety in his voice replaced by a calm certainty. He knew Bo had his back. Paz then spoke after Din. For the first half of his speech, Din thought Paz was about to advocate against their proposal. But then, Paz turned his speech around, declaring his support for both Din and Bo in their cause to help Navarro. It seemed that Bo's initiative in rescuing Ragnar had paved the way for Paz to lend his support. Following Paz's endorsement, the entire covert voiced their agreement, including the armorer, collectively echoing, "This is the way." As soon as the meeting concluded, Bo-Katan called Din over to brief him on the plans she had devised for the mission. As expected, Bo had already formulated a strategic plan that promised to secure their victory against the pirates. She proposed a coordinated attack targeting both the pirates occupying the land and Gorian Shard's ship hovering above. With only 2 ships at their disposal, Din's N1 and Bo's Gauntlet, they had to maximize their resources and tactical advantage. Din couldn't help but admire Bo's tactical brilliance, a quality he had recognized since they first met on Trask. This was her forte, and her leadership rekindled his confidence in their impending mission. We need to use the element of surprise, just like we did on Trask when we hijacked that Gozanti ship. Even if we're outnumbered, they won't be prepared to engage with us. Catching them off guard is our best strategy, Bo explained, turning to Din. What do you think? That's a great plan, Bo, Din replied, recalling how effective their previous surprise attack had been. I can distract the Corsair and its snub fighters. I've crossed paths with Shard before, and not in the best way. I killed some of his men. Then he'll surely target you, and we can use that as a distraction. While you draw their attention, I'll drop the first team to initiate the ground attack, Bo said. Din nodded in agreement. Do you think they can handle it on their own down there without our help? She asked, seeking assurance. Yes, Din replied confidently. Paz Vizsla and the armorer can oversee the battle on land while we deal with the enemies in the air. Bo nodded. But Din noticed her fidgeting with her fingers. Spending so much time with her at the covert had taught him to recognize the meaning behind some of her gestures. When she fidgeted, it often meant she was worried about something. Is there something bothering you? Din asked gently. Bo turned to him quickly. Well, I just hope everything goes according to plan. It will, Bo, Din assured her, his voice gentle, a tone he reserved for Grogu and now for her as well. But if this fails, people from the covert might die, and so might the people of Navarro and your friend. Bo's voice trailed off, and Din immediately sensed her anxieties taking hold. Ever since their conversation about the living waters, Bo had started to open up to him little by little. Din was grateful for that. We'll make sure it doesn't fail, he said firmly. You won't fail them, Bo. It's not just them, Bo replied, her visor turning to his. I don't want to fail you either. This is important to you. Din let out a sympathetic smile. He could feel her worries and fears, and the truth was, he was worried and terrified about what could happen as well. He was the one who suggested that the covert help, and Bo had only joined him. If all this failed, it wasn't Bo who should be blamed. It should be him. Bo, you have never failed me, Din said. In every instance where I've placed my trust and faith in you, you've always delivered exactly what I needed. I'm confident you won't fail this time because I'll make sure you won't. Her failure would be his failure, and her victory would be his victory. They were bound by more than just duty now. They were bound by a shared purpose and mutual respect. Bo seemed to draw strength from his words, her posture straightening. Then we better discuss our plan to eliminate the Corsair, she said, her voice now more enthusiastic and at ease. Din nodded, feeling a surge of hope. Together they reviewed their strategies, refining every detail with precision. The stakes were high, but so was their resolve. Din had never been more grateful to have Bo by his side. He hoped it could continue being like this. With her, it felt like every battle was worth fighting for, and every challenge was surmountable. Chapter 12. Fight for Navarro. Din was always in awe whenever Bo displayed her leadership skills. He marveled at the authoritative air she carried, one that commanded respect from everyone around her, regardless of her past. While her abrasive behavior often put people off, no one could deny her competence. Din was sure that their battle with Gorian Shard would be victorious, no matter the odds are. After Bo's briefing on the plan they had devised together the previous night, they readied themselves for the battles ahead, each aboard their respective ships. Din was on his N1 starfighter with Grogu, while Bo led the first team aboard her gauntlet, preparing to eliminate the pirates on the ground. Bo, I'm going to start making my attack on the Corsair, Din informed her as he approached Shard's formidable ship. Copy, Din, Bo replied, the gauntlet parting ways with the N1 to await Din's signal. Stay safe. Din initiated his assault on the Corsair, targeting one of its engines, skillfully drawing the attention of the enemy snub fighters. As they gave chase, the Corsair itself turned to aim its gunnels at him. With the enemy's focus firmly on Din, Bo could now safely execute the rest of their plan. The Corsair's on me. The coast is clear, he communicated through the comm. He heard Bo acknowledge as she deployed the first team, successfully dropping them away. Though Din was outnumbered by the enemies pursuing him, he remained confident he could manage just fine until Bo joined him. He had already managed to eliminate a few of the snub fighters, his skill and determination evident in every maneuver. He just hoped their fellow Mandalorians on the ground were faring equally well. Din, what's your position? Bo's voice crackled through the comm, a mixture of urgency and calm. I'm over the flats with snub fighters in pursuit. You're clear to start your run. Din responded immediately, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Minutes felt like hours as Din weaved through the air, evading enemy fire. The distant sound of explosions finally reached his ears, signaling that Bo had begun her attack on the Corsair. A brief glance at his radar confirmed his suspicion. The snub fighters chasing him were no longer behind him. They had diverted their attention to Bo. A pang of worry hit him. Din remembered that the Gauntlet's shields were already damaged from the dogfight over Kalevala. The thought of Bo's ship notwithstanding the impact gnawed at him. He couldn't let that happen. Determined, Din hastily maneuvered to assist Bo. The landscape below blurred as he pushed his ship to its limits. As he approached, he saw one of the snub fighters closing in on the Gauntlet, its weapons primed to fire. Din's heart pounded in his chest. He wouldn't allow that to happen, not on his watch. With precise aim, Din unleashed a barrage of laser fire, striking the snub fighter before it could harm Bo's ship, then swiftly took out the other two snub fighters pursuing the Gauntlet as well. Only one remained, which he believed was piloted by Vane. Before he could engage the lone snub fighter, it veered away and escaped. Din wanted to pursue and finish off that pirate, but the Corsair remained a significant threat to the planet that needed to be neutralized. Destroying it was their priority. Vane could wait for another day. Judging by how many engines he and Bo had already destroyed on Shard's Corsair and how heavily they had damaged its shields, Din presumed that the Pirate King would recognize a losing battle. He hoped Shard would accept defeat, surrender, and leave Navarro in peace. In that case, Din might even consider sparing his life. But when are pirate captains ever wise? Shard was no exception. On the brink of defeat, Shard turned the Corsair to fire on the townspeople. It seemed he didn't want to go down alone, and was willing to destroy his own men on the ground, who could be hit by his ship's gunnels. He's targeting the townspeople, Bo informed Din urgently over the comm. They had to stop him before he hurt anyone or caused further destruction on the planet. We've got to take him down, Din asserted, his voice resolute. Focus fire on their last engine. With determined precision, Din initiated a series of assaults on the Corsair's remaining functional engine. His shots were relentless, each one striking with deadly accuracy. From the opposite side, Bo joined in, her aim as steady as her resolve. Her shots were calculated and unwavering, every hit bringing them closer to their goal. Together, their combined firepower overwhelmed the engine, leading to a spectacular explosion that sent shards of metal and fire into the sky. As they converged in the middle, their ships wove an intricate ballet, each pilot instinctively steering to the right to avoid collision. It was as if they shared a mental link, their synchronization more like a perfectly choreographed dance than a tactical maneuver. The Corsair, now a crippled hulk, hurtled towards the surface of Navarro. The once mighty ship was now a doomed projectile, its descent an uncontrolled spiral of smoke and fire. Upon impact, it erupted into a massive fiery explosion, sending shockwaves through the ground and marking the end of the threat that had loomed over the planet. Bo, did you sustain any damage? Din called over the comm, concern threading through his voice. No, they didn't land a single hit on the ship, Bo replied, her tone carrying a hint of pride. Thanks to you. Din let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. How are things holding up below? The armorer informed me that they successfully neutralized the threat on the ground. The remaining pirates surrendered, Bo reported as they both scanned the terrain for a suitable landing spot on Navarro. How are you and Grogu, by the way? Before Din could reply, a delighted squeal erupted from Grogu's seat, filling the cockpit with infectious joy. Bo chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. I guess that's enough to answer your question, Din said with a smile, glancing at Grogu with affection. Looks like the kid enjoys it when you fly like that. Don't encourage him, Din teased, though his tone was light and playful. He'll likely throw up after it. Bo's laughter filled the comm, a melodious sound that made Din's heart flip. He cherished these moments of levity amidst the chaos, grateful that he could bring a smile to Bo's face, just as she did to his. As the N1 and the Gauntlet touched down on the surface of Navarro, Their comrades, along with the residents of Navarro, eagerly awaited their arrival. The townspeople erupted into applause and cheers as Din disembarked from his N1. He walked towards Grief, who greeted him with a wide grin. "Mando, I'm so happy to see you here again, my friend," Grief called out, extending his hand. Din accepted the handshake. "Likewise," Din replied. "Thank you for rescuing us and also for convincing your people to help. It might not have been easy considering the past," Grief acknowledged, his gratitude evident. "It wasn't easy, but my people have managed to leave that behind," Din said, his voice steady. "I hope it's all right to extend your offer of land not just to me, but to my fellow Mandalorians as well. Our covert is currently residing in a very difficult place that is not suitable for our young ones." "Of course," Grief answered with glee, his eyes shining with sincerity. "It's the least we can offer to the people who saved us from such a threat. If you're welcome here, so are your people." "Thank you," Din said, a weight lifting from his shoulders. As the cheers of the townspeople continued to echo around them, Din felt a sense of relief and hope. Navarro could be a new beginning for their people, a place where they could rebuild and thrive. The doors of the gauntlet hissed open, drawing the attention of Din and Grief. As Bo stepped out, the townspeople erupted into cheers, their voices rising in a cacophony of gratitude and admiration. Her visor scanned the crowd from side to side, as if searching for someone amidst the throng of jubilant faces. Din realized she must be looking for him. With the sea of people around them, she might not have spotted him right away. Raising his hand, he gave a gentle wave to catch her attention. Bo's visor finally locked onto his, and they exchanged nods, a silent understanding passing between them. Grief cleared his throat, drawing Din's attention back. With a knowing look and a smile, Grief said, "Mind introducing your new friend? I don't think I've ever seen her before." "She's Bo-Katan Kryze," Din introduced, trying to ignore the persistent grin of amusement on Grief's face as he watched Bo converse with a fellow Mandalorian. "She's the one who helped me devise the strategy to save Navarro. This wouldn't have succeeded without her." Grief's eyes widened slightly, clearly impressed. "Well, we all owe her a great debt then. You both did a remarkable job getting rid of Shard's Corsair," Grief said, glancing at Bo again before looking back at Din. "But Kryze, such a familiar surname. I feel like I've heard it before," Grief mused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "She used to be the ruler of Mandalore," Din replied, observing the widening of Grief's eyes. "Maybe you've heard about her because of that." "The ruler of Mandalore?" Grief's eyes lit up with sudden recognition. "Oh right, I remember hearing stories about Mandalore, but I thought she had died a long time ago. Because of the purge? No, long before that. Stabbed by a saber or something." "The dark saber?" "Yes, that." Grief clapped his hands together, causing Din to furrow his brow in confusion. Bo had been stabbed by the dark saber. But Grief continued. "But was Bo-Katan her name? I swear it was Satine. Satine. Yes, that's it. Duchess of Mandalore. Satine Kryze." Din shook his head, the name unfamiliar to him. Bo had never mentioned anyone named Satine. The only family she had spoken of was her father, Adonai Kryze. "I don't know her. I believe she has a sister. Maybe that's her friend," Grief suggested. Din glanced back at Bo, a surge of curiosity and concern welling up inside him. She had a sister? And she died because of the darksaber? Questions swirled in his mind. Why hadn't Bo mentioned her sister in their conversations if this Satine was really her sister? Perhaps it was something too painful or significant to share, like the weight of what she had seen in the living waters, or perhaps even heavier. "Maybe," Din replied simply. "Anyway, how did you come across her?" Grief began to pry. "It's a long story," Din replied, his gaze shifting back to Bo-Katan. "To put it simply, she rescued me from danger on Trask when I was searching for more of our kind and Grogu's kind. She helped me rescue Grogu from Moff Gideon too. She also assisted me on Mandalore, helping me redeem myself and clearing me of being an apostate. She rescued me there as well twice. And now, in return, I'm helping her after her castle was destroyed on Kalevala. She's the last of her line, and her fleet abandoned her. So Grogu and I are aiding her for the meantime. Who knows who could be after her? Grief listened intently, his expression shifting from curiosity to understanding. I see, he remarked, a spark of insight in his eyes. Din felt as if Grief was perceiving something deeper beneath his helmet. It sounds like you've both been through a lot. It's good you have found someone you can trust and rely on in times like these. Din glanced back at Bo-Katan, who was now speaking with a group of Mandalorians. Yeah, he said softly. I'm really grateful our paths crossed, he added, without realizing he had said it out loud. Grief's eyes flickered with a knowing look. You care about her deeply, don't you? Din was taken aback by Grief's remark and quickly turned to face him. He just nodded awkwardly, clearing his throat. Of course I do. I consider her a friend of mine. Friends, Grief chuckled, tapping Din on the shoulder and offering a warm smile. Well, to me, it sounds like you both have a bond that goes beyond the battlefield. That's rare and valuable. Make sure to hold on to it. Din nodded, a thoughtful expression hidden beneath his helmet. I will. Of course you will, Grief said sincerely, his smile genuine. Anyway, I have to welcome your people first. Let's catch up later once you've settled. As Grief moved to address the gathering Mandalorians, Din found himself reflecting on their conversation. He watched Bo interact with the townspeople and fellow Mandalorians, her confidence and grace evident in every movement. He remembered the times Bo had been there for him, saving him from danger, helping him rescue Grogu, and assisting him on Mandalore. She had stood by him when others might have faltered, and he knew he would do the same for her without hesitation. Din made his way over to Grogu, climbing under the wing of his ship. He noticed Grogu squinting and fidgeting, annoyed by the sunlight on his face. With a protective gesture, Din positioned himself to shield Grogu from the sun as Grief began his speech. Grief addressed the people of Navarro and Din's people. He thanked the Mandalorians for their intervention and praised them for eliminating the pirates from Navarro. As a token of appreciation and goodwill, Grief officially granted the Mandalorians a portion of the planet's land to settle and call home. The people of Navarro erupted into cheers, their applause echoing through the square. Din, along with his fellow Mandalorians, saluted by placing their fists on their chests and bowing, a gesture of respect and gratitude. As the crowd began to disperse, Din observed his people preparing to move their tribe, establish their new settlement. They would soon begin the task of transporting their belongings and ensuring the safety of their children on the new land. Bo had authorized one of their covert members to pilot the gauntlet and retrieve the remaining members of their tribe from the former covert. The gauntlet was now readying for takeoff once more. But before Din could get off the N1's wing where he was standing, he saw Paz Vizsla approach Bo. It seemed like Paz whispered something to her. After a few seconds, she nodded and followed him in the direction of the old forge on Navarro. Din scanned the area and realized he hadn't seen the armorer since he and Bo landed. A sense of unease crept over him. He wanted to follow them, but seeing Paz with Bo reassured him, and if there were any immediate danger, they wouldn't be walking away so calmly. Patu. Din turned his head to Grogu, who seemed to have sensed his worry. Grogu pointed a tiny finger towards Bo, who was walking away with Paz. She'll be right back, kid, Din assured Grogu, though he was also trying to reassure himself. While we wait for her, we should help the others unpack our things. The rest of the tribe will arrive soon. Chapter 13. Bo's Newfound Goal. Summary. Din's POV in Episode 5. The pirate, the armorer, bestowed Bo a new mission: reunite their people. Bo had to go and find her fleet, and Din wanted to help her. As Din worked alongside his fellow Mandalorians, he noticed Paz Vizsla had returned, but Bo was nowhere in sight. The unease that had been simmering beneath the surface began to bubble over. Din approached Paz, his curiosity impossible to contain any longer. Where is Bo-Katan Kryze? Din asked, his voice direct and tinged with concern. Paz paused in his task of moving crates, glancing at Din before replying. The armorer is speaking to her in the forge, he said, then resumed his work. You shouldn't disturb them. Din's gaze drifted toward the path leading to the forge. What could the armorer and Bo be discussing in such secrecy? Could Bo be deciding to leave? The thought crept in, unwelcome and insistent. Din shook his head, trying to dismiss the notion. Bo had shown no signs of wanting to leave the tribe, and he believed they were close enough that she would inform him if she were considering such a decision. She wouldn't just disappear without a word. He told himself he was overthinking it. He was worrying too much and needed to relax. They had just won a significant battle today, and he should be celebrating alongside his friend and their people. Instead of torturing himself with thoughts of Bo leaving, he decided to focus on the task at hand. Din busied himself with unpacking their supplies and setting up their new settlement. He reminded himself that this was a time for joy and gratitude, not needless worry. Din allowed his thoughts to drift to more pleasant things. He thought about what Bo might cook for dinner once she returned. Her culinary skills had always been a source of delight for him and Grogu, and they had always enjoyed the meals they had with her in her goblet. With Grogu by his side, Din focused on the immediate tasks, feeling a bit more at ease. The Mandalorians moved with coordinated efficiency, setting up temporary shelters made of tents. The sight of his people working together to build a future on a safer planet like Navarro without needing to hide was heartening. After a few moments, Din noticed the loud chattering of their people gradually turning into whispers. He was thankful for their consideration, appreciating the silence that allowed him to focus on his work. Loud environments often annoyed him, especially the incessant chatter of people. But then, Grogu babbled, drawing Din's attention. He looked down to see his son staring intently at something. Turning to where Grogu's eyes are set, Din felt a jolt of shock that resonated to his core. Approaching him were Bo and the armorer. Bo's face was in full view, her helmet tucked under her arm. A mix of emotions surged through Din. He was happy to finally see her face again, realizing just how much he had missed her features. Yet, the sight of her without her helmet brought a painful realization. Removing her helmet meant she was deciding to leave their tribe. Din felt his heart shatter into pieces. He had admittedly expected a day like this to come, but certainly not today. Why would she be leaving right now? Were the bonds they had forged not strong enough for her to consider staying, even for a little while longer? The whispers around them grew louder, a murmur of surprise and confusion spreading through the Mandalorians. Bo had become an integral part of their tribe, a leader they had grown to respect and admire. Her departure would be a significant loss to their covert. Din tried to understand Bo-Katan's expression, but her eyes avoided his as she and the armorer walked towards the entrance of the gauntlet. He could sense that Bo was tense and uncomfortable. He had never seen her make that kind of expression before. It was as if there was fear evident in her eyes. As Paz approached the armorer and Bo, Din could feel Paz's judgment already weighing heavily in the air. Bo-Katan Kryze is going off to bring other Mandalorians in exile to us so that we may join together once again, the armorer announced. So that's the reason she's leaving, he thought. Bo-Katan had found a new goal to pursue. While Din was grateful she had discovered this renewed sense of purpose, a multitude of questions swirled in his mind. Was she planning to undertake this monumental task all by herself, without the support of the tribe, or more pointedly, without his help? Rallying scattered Mandalorians from the far corners of the galaxy was no small feat. The dangers were countless, and the burden immense. But she shows her face, Paz countered, his tone dripping with disapproval. Bo seemed to shrink under the weight of his words, turning her head away from both Din and Paz. Shame flickered across her features, a rare moment of vulnerability for the proud warrior Din had come to know. Seeing her like this stirred something deep within him. He had an overwhelming urge to go to her, to reassure her that there was no shame in her choice to deviate from their strict traditions. He wanted her to look at him so he could tell her that she shouldn't feel ashamed, at least not in front of him. Din knew that Bo would ultimately make decisions that felt true to herself. Her strength and firm adherence to her own perspectives were qualities he deeply admired. It was these traits that had always set her apart and made her a leader among their people. He resolved to accept her no matter what path she chose, and nothing would diminish nor lessen the bond he had built with her. Bo-Katan walks both worlds. the armorer proclaimed with conviction. And she can bring all tribes together, she continued, her voice resolute. So, even though Bo-Katan removed her helmet, the tribes still accepted her as one of their own. This revelation meant that she could be both a night owl and a child of the Watch simultaneously, bridging the gap between their differing beliefs. Din was baffled but immensely relieved. If this were true, it meant the tribe wouldn't turn their backs on Bo. She could remain a part of his people, despite not strictly adhering to their way. Bo's unique position could indeed be the key to uniting their fractured people. He felt a profound sense of optimism as he considered the potential for reconciliation among the Mandalorians. Bo-Katan's ability to navigate both worlds, honoring the traditions of the past while embracing the necessary changes of the present, might just make her the leader they all needed. Bo cautiously lifted her gaze to meet Paz's eyes. In response, Paz turned his head towards Din, prompting Bo to follow his line of sight. As Din met the shared gaze of both Paz and Bo, he gave an approving nod, signaling his acceptance of Bo and the armorer's words about her. Din noticed how Bo let out a deep sigh of relief, the tension immediately draining from her body. Had she feared he might turn his back on her for not strictly adhering to their ways, just as her fleet did when she returned without the dark saber? Din wanted to assure her that she had him long before she became part of his tribe. With or without her helmet, whether she lived by his people's ways or not, he wanted to support Bo more than anything. Bo's worth was not determined by her adherence to tradition, but by her courage, leadership, and unwavering resolve. Din's companionship and concern for her well-being were rooted in something much deeper, and he was determined not to let her feel abandoned again. "It is time to retake Mandalore," the armorer announced. Now his people were also invested in Bo's goals, which they had initially shown no interest in, believing that their planet was still inhospitable. But it seemed the armorer was finally convinced that Mandalore wasn't what they had believed or had been led to believe. Din was glad he wasn't the only one supporting Bo in her lifelong endeavor. The other Mandalorians were still wary and confused about the armorer's words, but no one voiced their complaints. They knew that the armorer's guidance was something they could rely on. If the armorer believed it was good for their covert, then they would accept her decision. After the shocking announcement about Bo-Katan, the armorer ordered everyone to return to their tasks and walked away to assist others. Bo glanced at Din and Grogu briefly, but then looked away and entered the gauntlet. Din froze as a realization struck him. Was she leaving right at this moment? The thought spurred him into action, and he hastily followed Bo inside the gauntlet. "Bo!" Din called as he reached the cockpit. He found her checking on the gauntlet's food storage in the small kitchen where they usually cooked their meals. Grogu's pram floated in silently behind him, the child's curious eyes following the scene. "Din." Bo acknowledged him with a brief glance, meeting his visor for just a moment before continuing her task. "I need to restock food for my journey. Do you think your friend Grief has some dehydrated supplies that are easy to prepare and eat while traveling, or should I just buy some along the way?" Din's heart sank at her words. She had said I and my. She truly intended to carry out her mission alone. He had been waiting for her to ask him to join her, to offer his help. But Bo remained focused on her supplies, oblivious to the turmoil within him. Din watched her in silence, his chest tightening with each passing second. He yearned to hear the words he longed for, words that would bind them together on this journey. Yet, Bo continued her preparations, her mind seemingly set on her solitary path. "I also need to track my fleet. You mentioned that Grief was your guild master, and that he used to give you fobs or tracking devices when you were bounty hunting for him. Do you think he still has something like that now that I can borrow? It'll make it easier for me to locate my fleet. Honestly, I have no idea where they are right now." Din didn't respond. He continued to stare at Bo, who was still busying herself with the supplies. When his silence persisted, Bo turned to him, her eyebrows furrowing in concern and frustration. "Din, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice tinged with impatience. "I can," he replied simply. "Then why aren't you answering?" Bo's frustration was rising. "Are you making a fool of me right now, Din? I'm not in the mood for banter. I have an important mission to complete. I know, Din said as he took a step towards her, his gaze unwavering behind his visor. Bo looked away, trying to focus on her task again, but Din's presence was impossible to ignore. I'm not here to banter with you either. Then what? Bo snapped, turning her head towards him violently. Frustration was evident in her green eyes, eyes that Din was grateful to finally see once more, though not looking at him like this. Is this your way of saying you're upset with me? Is it because I'm not adhering to the creed? To the way? I thought you were fine with me removing my helmet just a while ago. You nodded. Din felt a pang of guilt. She couldn't meet his gaze earlier because she was afraid he would resent her for removing her helmet, but that didn't matter to him. I'm not upset about the helmet, Din clarified, his voice gentle but firm. Then you are upset about something else, Bo pointed out, her frustration not easing. Din sighed, nodding his head slowly. Yes, I am, he admitted. I'm upset that you are thinking of doing this mission alone. Bo blinked, taken aback by his words. For a moment her frustration seemed to ebb as she processed what he was saying. It seemed she finally understood the message Din was trying to convey, what he wanted from her at this moment. Bo stood in front of him in silence, staring directly into his visor as if trying to read some expression through his expressionless helmet. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Then she looked away, shaking her head as she turned away from him. The armorer said that I should be the one to do it myself. It's my task and my fleet, Din, Bo said, her voice resolute. And when they see you, trust me, they wouldn't take it well. They'll likely force us to fight for the Darksaber right then and there. Din could vividly imagine the scenario Bo described. It was highly likely, and it was indeed her fleet. And she had unresolved issues with them. This was her fight, not his. But Bo had joined their battle in Navarro today, even though grief wasn't her friend. She had helped him, even though she didn't have to, and Din wanted to do the same for her. He admired her courage and willingness to support others, even when it wasn't her responsibility. It inspired him to be just as steadfast in his loyalty no matter what. But even if the whole pirate incident had never happened, even if she hadn't helped him today, Din knew he and Grogu would still follow her wherever she went. That had been his resolve from the very beginning. Ever since he had brought her to the covert, he wouldn't let her face these challenges alone. You can't do this alone, Bo. You know that, Din persisted, making Bo sigh in exasperation. He was determined to keep telling her this until she got so annoyed that she'd let him join her. He'd be insufferable if he had to, but he wouldn't back down. You helped me in this fight today, and now let me help you in yours. I'm not asking you to repay my assistance for today, Bo stated firmly, briefly glancing at him. This is not a repay for your assistance, Din replied, his voice unwavering. You have asked me before on Trask. You offered me the chance to join you in your mission to retake Mandalore, and you said the offer stands if I ever changed my mind. That ship has already sailed, Din, Bo said, not batting an eye as she continued reassembling her supplies. No, it hasn't, Din argued, his voice filled with conviction. I'm taking up that offer right now. Finding your fleet and bringing them here is part of your goal to retake Mandalore. Grogu and I are going with you. Bo turned to face him, her eyes searching his visor for some sort of clarity. Din, why are you doing the— This is the way, he interrupted, the phrase carrying a finality that silenced her. The question Bo was about to ask was something he doesn't have a clear answer to, or rather had no courage to confront right now. Bo stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. Din's determination left no room for argument. He and Grogu were coming with her, whether she liked it or not. For a moment Bo looked as if she might protest, but then she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly in resignation. She stared at his visor for a few seconds before closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, she met Din's gaze and nodded. This is the way. Din stepped back. Then let me go and talk to Grief about the food and the tracking device. All right, Bo replied simply. Thank you. Din nodded as he made his way out of the gauntlet. Grogu had placed his pram near the cockpit, likely hiding when Din and Bo were arguing. Let's go, Grogu. Grogu followed him, but before they exited the gauntlet, Din noticed the child looking back towards where Bo is. Was Grogu sensing something about Bo's emotions? Is Bo not feeling all right? Din wondered aloud. He wasn't entirely sure about the full extent of a Jedi's abilities, but he had learned that they could somehow sense emotions. Grogu turned to him swiftly, his eyes narrowing in a clear, accusatory manner, as if to say, "I wonder whose fault it is that she's in a bad mood." Din sighed. He knew the tension between him and Bo was palpable, and that their earlier argument had undoubtedly affected her. He hadn't meant to argue with her or make her feel bad. He just wanted to help her with her mission. He wasn't mad at her. He was mad at himself for not having done enough to make Bo rely on him as much as he relied on her. He was worried that she might slip out of his life, and that worry was making him frustrated. "Do you want to stay here with her, buddy?" Din asked softly. Grogu nodded, and Din smiled beneath his helmet. "All right," Din whispered. "Look after her. I'll be right back." Greef was more than happy to provide Din with whatever they needed for their mission. He had prepared provisions that would be enough to sustain their journey for at least a week. Din was grateful that Greef still had the tracking devices they had used before to track their bounties. "You've just arrived and you're leaving already?" Greef asked, a note of concern in his voice. "It's what's been decided. Bo is the one the armorer said would unite our people. It is our goal now," Din explained, "but the tribe will stay here until we gather the fleet." Greef nodded, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I understand, Mando. Navarro is different from Mandalore, and there's no place like home. You and your people deserve to live your own planet." He then turned to Din, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Who's Bo, though?" "Bo-Katan Kryze," Din replied simply. "Oh, didn't know you two were on a nickname basis already," Greef teased. "So it's just the two of you on this mission?" "No, Grogu is coming along," Din replied. "I see," Greef said, a smile spreading across his face as he nodded. "Well then, I wish you a safe trip, all three of you. I hope you succeed in finding your and your people's true home." "Thank you. Please look out for the covert," Din requested. "You got it, Mando," Greef assured him. As Din made his way back to the gauntlet, along with everything they needed, he felt that their journey to find Bo's fleet was definitely going to be a long one. Chapter 14. A Dance in the Gauntlet. Din couldn't sleep. He and Grogu were in one of the Gauntlet's cabins en route to find Bo's fleet. The aftermath of his argument with Bo hung heavily in the air, creating an awkward tension between them. Thankfully, Grogu's presence helped ease the discomfort with his childish antics, bringing a semblance of lightness to the otherwise strained atmosphere. Despite this, Din could see that Bo was visibly uneasy. He couldn't shake the nagging thought that this might all be his fault. Had he been too insistent on joining her mission? Now that he could freely see her expression, he felt a mix of emotions. While he was admittedly happy to see her face again, this wasn't the expression he wanted to see on her. Had he been too pushy, too determined to impose his presence on her mission? The guilt gnawed at him, making sleep an impossible endeavor. He turned to glance at Grogu, who was peacefully dozing in his pram, the soft rise and fall of his breathing providing a small measure of comfort. Since sleep wouldn't come no matter what he did, Din sat up and quietly left the room, careful not to wake Grogu. He made his way to the cockpit, not expecting to find Bo wide awake. She turned to him, her face immediately tensing up. "Why are you still awake?" she asked him. "I can't sleep," Din simply replied as he sat in his usual co-pilot seat, crossing his arms. "But you said you sleep well just by having Grogu by your side," she responded. Din couldn't exactly tell her that she was the cause of his wakefulness, constantly running through his thoughts. So he tried diverting the question to her instead. "Why aren't you asleep? I thought you could sleep well without the helmet on your head." Both of them chuckled, realizing the foolishness of their exchange in this moment. They had contradicted the things they said that night when they also couldn't fall asleep before rescuing Ragnar. For a few moments, the cockpit was filled with a comfortable silence, the earlier tension easing slightly. Din glanced at Bo, noting the fatigue etched on her smiling face. The dim light from the control panel cast soft shadows, highlighting the weariness she carried. Then Bo's smile faded as she lowered her head. Concern tugged at Din's heart. He couldn't help but worry about her. He wondered if this was the expression she always wore, even when she was with him and Grogu in the covert. Was her face always this somber and sad? What could she possibly be thinking about? Was it their mission to gather her fleet? Was she worried that she might not be able to convince them to join? Was she thinking about how she was going to face them? Or was it him? Did his presence bother her that much? Was she always this uncomfortable with him? Din wanted to ask Bo. He wanted to know her thoughts, her worries, and whatever else was weighing on her mind. But he had learned from their argument earlier that he might have been a bit too pushy today, and he didn't want to test how much further Bo could tolerate him. Still, he wanted to comfort her. He longed to say something that would bring back the smile he had been longing to see on her face, the laughter he missed when they were still in the covert. But he wanted to say the right thing, and he couldn't do that without knowing exactly what was troubling her. Then an idea crossed his mind as he briefly glanced at the control panel beside him. He had tinkered with the console once and noticed there was a button for playing music. He pressed the button, and the cockpit was immediately filled with the melodic tunes of an instrument. But Din wanted to find something more mellow, warm and comforting to listen to, so he skipped from one song to another until he heard the familiar strains of a tune. He had heard it once, playing on the streets of a planet whose name he couldn't remember, but the music had certainly stayed with him. It was being played by a Bith with a saxophone, and it had captured him entirely, reminding him of the tunes his parents used to dance to in Akvatina when he was young. Din leaned back into his seat and looked over at Bo. Her eyes were closed as she also leaned into her chair, a small smile forming on her face. Good, Din thought, glad to see Bo being calmed by his chosen music. He even started to hear her humming along with the song. This is one of my favorites, Din spoke softly. I don't listen to music much, but this one caught my attention the moment I heard it for the first time. It's a music for Redalore, Bo explained. It's meant for a dance between two people. Usually, a father and daughter or a newlywed couple would dance to this music at a Ridurok, a marriage ceremony in Mandalore. Din hummed and nodded, his mind wandering. Did Bo ever dance to music like this before? Have you danced to this music before? Yes, with my father, she shared. He said he wanted to prepare me in case I got married in the future. I'm not fond of dancing, so I often stepped on the feet of my dance tutors. My dad used to worry that the one I'd marry would suffer a foot injury after the ceremony. Bo chuckled. Well, he shouldn't have worried about that. It seems like I won't be getting married anyway. Din turned to her, curious about her words. Why would you think that? Why wouldn't I think that? She replied, bitterness evident in her voice. I don't think I'm meant for that sort of thing, she muttered, fidgeting with her hands. Her face returned to that somber expression, making Din's heart ache. Did she really think no one in this vast galaxy would want to spend a lifetime with an amazing woman like her? But Din could also understand her. He had held the same view of himself for a long time. He believed he was meant to live his life in solitude, and for a while he had no complaints about his way of living. But then Grogu came into his life, and he realized that he also wanted someone to spend the rest of his life with. I also thought that way about myself, he shared, making Bo turn to him, eyes curious, that I wasn't meant for a family life or having a kid. Look where I am now. Bo smiled, but her face didn't show that she was convinced at all. This broke Din's heart. She didn't take his words seriously. He meant it. He wanted her to be happy. Are you trying to convince me to get married, Din? She quipped. Despite her playful grin, the sadness in her eyes was evident. Din wanted to assure her that she deserved to be happy, that she deserved someone to love her, cherish her, and stay right by her side. She'd been alone for too long, and Din understood how lonely it was to live in a galaxy full of beings, yet have no one to call your own, no place or being to call your home. Instead of answering her teasing, Din just shrugged his shoulders. He felt that no matter how sincere his words were, it wouldn't be enough to dispel Bo's negative emotions about herself. But he wanted to do something to comfort her still, to cheer her up. Before he could stop to think about his next steps, he stood up and approached her, extending his hand. Bo looked at him in surprise, her eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of uncertainty. What are you doing, Din? Asking you for a dance, he replied, his voice a mix of determination and nervousness. The overwhelming urge to hold her close had taken over him, and thankfully, he had an excuse. You said the music is meant for dancing. Bo looked like she was about to say no, and Din was about to regret following his impulsive thoughts. But he saw that it wasn't disgust in Bo's eyes. It was an expression he frequently saw in people he used to hunt as bounties every time they saw him coming after them. Fear. Don't be afraid, Din gently said, assuring her that she didn't need to be afraid, especially of him. I won't get mad even if you step on my foot. I won't judge your dancing skills. You have my word. Those words seemed to vanquish her fears as she slowly placed her hand in his. The feeling of Bo's hand in his sent electricity throughout Din's soul. He wished they weren't wearing gloves so he could feel the warmth of her skin. He led her into the spacious center of the cockpit, placing her hand on his shoulder while holding her other hand tightly in his. He put his other hand on her waist and began to lead her in the dance, recalling the steps he had seen others perform before. He had always been good at learning by observing, and he was proud that he could still remember the dances he had watched and stored in his memory. He guessed that his brain had saved those moments for this very occasion. Din kept his eyes on Bo the entire time, relieved to see her smiling and the tension between them dissipating. She even chuckled as he spun her around, her hair whipping gently through the air, making her look even more beautiful in Din's eyes. This was the first time he had felt Bo this close without her helmet, and he began to notice small details on her face that he had never paid attention to before. He saw the freckles on her cheeks and nose, resembling a constellation of stars scattered across the night sky. He marveled at the vivid green of her eyes, a hue that reminded him of Grogu, evoking a sense of home and warmth. He also noticed the delicate golden earrings she wore, noting how perfectly they complemented her features. Din had encountered many pretty and gorgeous women before, but none had ever entranced him like Bo's beauty did in this moment. He hadn't fully appreciated it when she first removed her helmet on Trask, but now it was all he could think about as he continued to gaze at her. Nothing had changed in her appearance except for the slightly longer length of her red hair, but she seemed even more captivating now. He was entranced by the way her smile lit up her face and how her laughter sounded like music to his ears. Her presence was magnetic, drawing him in like never before. As they danced, Din realized that he was seeing Bo in a new light, and she was more beautiful to him than he had ever imagined. As the song progressed, Bo's initial hesitation faded completely. She followed his lead with ease, her movements becoming more fluid and confident. Din couldn't help but smile at the sight of her enjoying herself, her earlier sadness replaced with genuine joy. Where did you learn to dance? She asked him curiously. Self-taught, he answered, feeling smug that she seemed impressed with his skills. Even when I was a child, the people on my home planet loved dancing, and so did my parents. I've always been fascinated whenever I saw people dance, so I learned by observing. This is my first time really dancing, though. Not bad, Bo complimented, making him smile. It's because I have a good partner, Din returned the compliment. Bo was also a good dancer. She should give herself more credit as well. Just you wait, Bo warned with a smirk. Don't get complacent. What if you get hurt later on? Din smiled beneath his helmet. I told you I don't mind, Bo. Being stepped on his foot was a small price to pay for holding her this close. And we'll take it slow at our own pace. That way, no one will get hurt. Her smile widened. I would like that. Din's hold on her hand tightened as they continued to dance around the cockpit. It felt as if the entire galaxy had melted away, leaving just the two of them in this intimate moment. They moved in perfect harmony, each step bringing them closer together, their movements synchronized, as if they had danced together 1,000 times before. Bo closed her eyes, surrendering to the music and the comfort of Din's presence. She rested her forehead against his shoulder, a soft sigh escaping her lips. The contentment on her face as she nestled in his arms stirred something deep inside Din, something he had never felt so strongly before. He felt an overwhelming urge to take off his helmet, to gently caress her face and kiss the scar that marked her skin. To kiss her. The thought sent a jolt through him, and once it crossed his mind, he couldn't shake it. It lingered, persistent and insistent, growing stronger with each passing moment they remained close to one another. Din's thoughts became more daring, more dangerous. The closeness, the shared warmth, the intimacy of their dance. It was almost too much to bear. He knew he had to do something before his impulses took control. The urge to break the boundaries he had always adhered to was becoming almost irresistible. Din took a steadying breath, trying to refocus his mind. He needed to keep his composure, to remember why they were here and what was at stake. Yet, the softness of her touch, the way she fit perfectly in his arms, made it incredibly difficult to think rationally. Then the music stopped, and Bo slowly separated herself from Din, opening her eyes and stepping back. Din didn't want to let her go, but he knew she needed to rest for the night. They both did, having not had the chance to relax after the intense battle on Navarro. "Thank you, Din," Bo said with a grateful smile that made Din's heart do somersaults. Her eyes shone with a warmth that matched her smile, and for a moment everything else faded away. "I hope you'll have a good night." "The same for you, Bo," Din replied, his voice soft but sincere. Bo then made her way to her own quarters, and Din watched her until she was out of sight. He then slumped in his co-pilot chair, the weight of the evening settling over him. Din knew that he was utterly and irrevocably done for. Chapter 15. Welcome to Pleasure and Love. It didn't take long for them to locate Bo's fleet. With Din's former experience as a bounty hunter and his exceptional tracking skills, the task was almost effortless. They arrived on the stunningly beautiful planet called Plazir 15. From above, the surface revealed grand architectural domes and picture-perfect green landscapes. Din had never seen a planet quite as scenic as this. It almost looked like a paradise, a heaven on land. "You know," Bo spoke to Grogu, who had his pram parked beside her seat, "Mandalore used to look almost like this as well. Do you remember the ruins we passed through on Mandalore?" Grogu nodded, his eyes wide and attentive. Din was listening as well. He redirected his gaze to the screen in front of him, where he could see the dome Bo was pointing at. "The capital city Sundari used to be as majestic as this dome," Bo continued, her voice filled with nostalgia. "Maybe someday when we take back our planet, it could look as beautiful as this." Din's mind wandered to the desolate ruins of Mandalore, a stark contrast to the vibrant life of Plazir 15. He oftentimes wished he had been there when Mandalore was at the peak of its glory, to witness firsthand the grandeur of his people's homeworld. He also wished he had been there during the purge that destroyed their planet. He may not have been able to change the course of history, but at least he could have stood by Bo's side, supporting her through one of the most devastating moments of her life. Din hoped that one day Bo could see Mandalore rebuilt, standing tall and majestic as she remembered it. The dream of a restored Mandalore wasn't just Bo's, it had become his as well. Grogu moved his pram closer to Bo, gently patting her pauldron as if to comfort her. "Patu," he murmured softly, his large eyes filled with concern and empathy. Bo smiled, her expression softening at the little one's touch. "Thank you, Grogu," she whispered, her voice tinged with affection. Grogu seemed delighted to finally see Bo's face again, a sense of familiarity and joy evident in his expressions. His happiness only grew as Bo and Din appeared to have become more closer after the night they danced together in the cockpit of the Gauntlet. Din couldn't stop his heart from palpitating every time he thought about the dance. The sight of her face so close, the weight of her stare, the warmth of her hand emanating through their gloves. These memories flooded his mind and made his cheeks warm. Thankfully, his helmet concealed his reddening face, sparing him the embarrassment of showing such vulnerable emotions. "There they are," Bo suddenly said, snapping Din out of his thoughts. He forced himself to focus on their mission. They couldn't afford any distractions. His deepening feelings for Bo were a distraction he had to control, no matter how powerful they might be. Din looked at the screen in front of his co-pilot's seat and saw a huge fleet comprised of familiar ships the Night Owls had stolen from the Empire, along with numerous gauntlets like theirs. "That's quite a fleet," he remarked. "It took me a long time to assemble it," Bo replied. Most of it was captured from the Empire, she added, glancing back briefly at him. I knew they looked familiar. They could come in real handy in taking back Mandalore. Axe Woves is their leader now. Woves. The name didn't ring a bell on Din. Was he perhaps one of the two he had met before? He remembered Bo calling the other she was with when they rescued Grogu as Koska, but he never really knew the name of the other man who was with them when he first met them on Trask. It's going to take some convincing to get them to join us, Bo continued. Din mulled over the prospect, imagining how the negotiation might unfold. If that guy was really Axe Woves, the one Bo had mentioned, Din had a strong feeling this would be an uphill battle. Woves had always seemed skeptical of him. He could still recall the way the man had eyed him with disdain since their encounter on Trask. Even before they hijacked the Gozanti ship, Din had overheard Woves whispering to Bo, questioning why she continued to rely on a zealot for such a crucial mission. It was clear the Night Owls harbored deep-seated resentment and indifference toward the Children of the Watch, his tribe. I wonder what they're here for, Din mused aloud. This planet isn't on the New Republic registry, so I'd guess it's an independent world that hired them for protection, Bo replied. Made sense. Can't imagine Woves would be happy to see you. The unspoken part, with me, hung heavy in the air between them. Judging by the heaviness of Bo's sigh, it seemed she had picked up on his unvoiced concern. The issue of uniting the fleet with the covert Mandalorians was still unresolved, and the mere thought of it was daunting. It wasn't just Woves they would need to convince. The entire fleet would have to come to terms with joining forces with the Watch. Yeah, Bo muttered, her tone resigned. I'll land outside the fleet's perimeter. It's probably best if we go in on foot. Din nodded in agreement. They couldn't risk any misunderstandings. If they flew the gauntlet straight into the fleet, it could easily be seen as an act of aggression, and given the tension already simmering between them, a measured approach was essential. Suddenly, the tense atmosphere in the cockpit was interrupted by an unexpected burst of loud, festive music. Din instinctively checked the controls, wondering if he had accidentally pressed the music button. Just as he was about to ask Bo if she had done something, a cheerful female voice filled the cockpit. Welcome to Plaisir 15, the Outer Rim's only remaining democracy. You've been assigned a docking slip. You will be guided on the assigned path. Engaging automated guidance. The ship shuddered slightly, then abruptly shifted course, veering away from the fleet's location. The gauntlet's automated systems had taken over, steering them toward a different area entirely. Din followed the new trajectory, which seemed to be leading them toward a section of the planet dominated by the massive glass dome. Bo quickly began pressing the controls, but the ship remained unresponsive. What happened? Din asked. They've taken control of the ship, Bo replied with a resigned sigh. It was clear their plans had just been derailed. Bo turned to Grogu as she leaned back in her chair. I guess we're going for a ride, she said, her tone light despite the situation, and Grogu responded with a cheerful coo. As the gauntlet touched down, Grogu eagerly activated his pram, preparing to zoom out of the ship. But before he could make his grand exit, Din quickly stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Bo had the same instinct, her hand gently but firmly holding the edge of the pram to prevent it from moving forward. Not so fast, kid, Din said, his tone firm, exchanging a brief glance with Bo. They both knew that whatever awaited them outside was unpredictable, and they couldn't afford to let Grogu rush headlong into it. Us first, Din reprimanded his son gently, though Grogu responded with a series of sputters and babbles, clearly expressing his impatience. Din sighed, feeling a familiar wave of exasperation at his son's usual stubbornness. Kid, I know you're excited to explore, but we still don't know if it's safe for us, Bo began, her voice calm as she knelt slightly to meet Grogu's gaze. Your dad and I will go out first, and you should stay right behind us. Din was grateful for Bo's way with Grogu. While he often struggled to get the little one to listen, Bo had a natural ability to communicate with him. Grogu seemed to understand her in a way that Din admired, and he watched as Grogu's usual defiance softened under Bo's gentle words. Grogu turned his gaze to Din, his large expressive eyes reflecting a reluctant understanding. Bo's right, Grogu, Din said. his own tone softening. Grogu nodded slowly. He maneuvered his pran behind Bo, his trust in them evident as he waited patiently for them to lead the way. Bo turned to Din and they nodded at each other before opening the ramp of the gauntlet. Walking side by side, they cautiously observed the surroundings. 2 Imperial droids painted in black were waiting for them outside. "This is interesting," Din commented. They exchanged a glance before looking back at Grogu, who hovered behind them. "Welcome to Plaza 15, greeted the black 3PO series protocol droid. "Please proceed to your Hyperloop pod." Din and Bo continued walking toward the Hyperloop pod waiting for them. "Why do they have Imperial droids on an independent world?" Din whispered to Bo as they walked cautiously. His eyes scanned the area, his wariness heightened by the sight of anything resembling Imperial technology, and the mere presence of those droids on the planet made him uneasy. "It's the Outer Rim," Bo replied. "Your guess is as good as mine." Din remained on edge, but he let Bo step into the pod first, following closely behind with Grogu in tow. "Bring us to the bay closest to the Mandalorian fleet," Bo ordered the pod. But instead of the smooth motion they were expecting, a calm female voice responded from the pod system. "As per Article 9 of the Coruscant Accords, permission must be granted from the High Senate for access to self-defense forces in the peacekeeping zone." Bo turned to Din, her expression incredulous, as if to say, "Are they serious?" Here they were, on a planet not even listed in the New Republic registry, yet they were invoking the rules of the Republic. The absurdity of it all was almost laughable. Din simply tilted his helmet slightly in response. The galaxy was filled with contradictions, and the hypocrisy of using New Republic regulations in such an isolated place was just another example. This was just one more frustration to navigate. "Do you grant permission to scan your chain code?" the voice asked. Bo rolled her eyes but relented, extending her arm to scan her chain code. Din followed suit, extending his arm for the scan. They both sat there, the tension between them palpable as they complied with these ritualistic guidelines to access transportation and get to the fleet. "Din Djarin and Bo-Katan Kryze, your presence has been requested by the leadership of the planetary democracy," the voice announced after a brief pause. Din felt a twinge of annoyance. What do the leaders of this planet want from us now? He wondered, his patience already wearing thin. It wouldn't be the first time they were roped into a mission or favor they hadn't asked for. Such situations seemed to follow him with uncanny regularity. Bo's eyes narrowed, clearly mirroring his frustration. "I'm afraid we have more pressing matters. Perhaps at a later time," she replied, her voice tinged with irritation. "Please do not attempt to leave the vehicle. This is not a request," the voice responded. Bo turned to Din, her annoyance evident, but before she could say anything, the pod suddenly lurched into motion. The sudden burst of speed caught all 3 of them off guard, the force of it pushing them slightly. Grogu, however, seemed to find the unexpected acceleration thrilling, his delighted coos echoing through the pod as he enjoyed the ride. Din turned around, taking in the surroundings. The society they had stepped into was clearly advanced, with sleek architecture and technology that hinted at a high level of sophistication. "I've never been here before." "Have you?" Bo asked, her eyes scanning the area with a mix of curiosity and caution. "I've never even heard of it," he replied, a note of wariness in his voice. "Do you think we'll have to blast our way out of this?" Given how little they knew about this planet, it wouldn't hurt to stay on high alert until they understood what they were dealing with. "We'll find out," Bo said simply, her tone steady. The pod finally came to a stop, and the door slid open to reveal a lavish, well-appointed establishment. They were entering unknown territory, and while the environment appeared welcoming, they knew better than to let their guard down. With Grogu safely tucked between them, they moved forward. The door creaked open, revealing a long, empty hallway that led to an imposing door at the far end. Din steeled himself, expecting to be ushered into a formal office, or perhaps an audience chamber where the planet's leaders would engage them in a serious conversation or negotiation. But as the door swung open to admit them into the next room, Din was met with an entirely unexpected sight. Instead of a somber meeting place, they were greeted by the sounds of laughter and blissful chatter. The room before them was a grand dining hall, richly adorned and filled with a diverse array of beings, all of whom appeared to be in high spirits. Long, elegantly set tables stretched across the room, laden with platters of exotic foods. The air was filled with the murmur of lively conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. It was a celebration in full swing. "Join us! Come, come!" called a voice from the far end of the table. The speaker was a man dressed in the most lavish clothing, clearly the most important person in the room. Din quickly surmised that this was the planet's ruler. Beside him, a woman clad in matching finery, presumably his wife, smiled warmly at them. "It's a party," the man declared with a broad grin. Din blinked, momentarily taken aback. A party? They had interrupted their mission for a party invitation. As they stepped into the festive room, the ruler's voice boomed again. "Come, everyone, special guests, Mandalorians." Din exchanged a glance with Bo-Katan, who looked just as bewildered as he felt. This was definitely not the reception they had anticipated. "I hope you like secretions. Take a little sip, the ruler said, gesturing toward the center of the dining table. Din's eyes followed the gesture and landed on an enormous aquarium-like structure suspended above the table. Inside, an octopus-like creature floated serenely, its many tentacles drifting lazily in the water. The guests at the table had thin, translucent straws that extended upward into the tank, sipping its liquid contents with apparent delight. Din suppressed a grimace. "No thanks," he thought. The ruler, noticing their hesitation, offered an encouraging smile. "Come, please," he urged. Bo-Katan glanced at Din again, and he gave her a subtle nod. During their time in the covert, they had perfected this unspoken language of nods and helmet tilts, a silent communication. There was no immediate sense of danger, but they would keep their guard up nonetheless. They understood the importance of not offending their hosts, especially when the situation was as strange as it was, and the stakes were unclear. It seemed prudent to play along, at least for now. Din and Bo allowed themselves to be led to seats near the couple. Grogu nestled comfortably between them. "Can you please serve more food for our new guests?" the woman requested of the servants. They bowed respectfully and swiftly departed to carry out her command. As they left, she turned to the three of them with a gentle smile. "You must be tired and exhausted from your journey." "We're fine, Your Grace," Bo replied, her tone courteous yet restrained. "Thank you for welcoming us to your planet." "Oh, the pleasure is all ours, Princess," the man responded with enthusiasm, his eyes gleaming with admiration. "We can hardly believe we're in the presence of the legendary Princess Kryze of Mandalore." Din often forgot the magnitude of Bo's true identity, but moments like this reminded him of the vast distance that separated them, an invisible gulf created by her royal bloodline. No matter how close they were, there was always the undeniable fact that she was of noble birth, a royal, while he was just a warrior, a foundling even. Glancing at Bo, Din noticed a subtle flicker in her expression, a slight twitch in her eyes. He was reminded of how bristled she had been when Boba Fett once called her princess. Despite her heritage, it seemed like Bo was not entirely comfortable with the weight that came with such a title. "We are the rulers of this planet. I am Captain Bombardier, and this is my wife, the beautiful Duchess of Plaisir 15. The man introduced himself with a proud smile, gently taking his wife's hand and placing a tender kiss on it. "Oh, honey, you flatter me," the Duchess responded, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink. "It's the truth, my love," her husband insisted, his affection for her evident. The Duchess then turned her attention to Din and Grogu, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "And you must be Din Djarin from Concordia. And who is this little one?" "His name is Grogu," Din replied without hesitation. As if on cue, Grogu let out a sweet, babbling sound that made the royal couple's hearts melt. Their expressions softened instantly, and they both exclaimed awe in unison. "Such a little darling," the woman remarked warmly. "You two have such a cute child." Din and Bo exchanged a quick glance. Bo immediately shook her head, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Oh no, Grogu is Din's son. We're not—" Her voice faltered, uncharacteristically hesitant as she struggled to find the right words. Normally so composed and articulate, Bo seemed to have found herself fumbling through an explanation. "Oh, forgive us," the Duchess interjected with sincere apology. her expression softening with understanding. "We honestly thought the three of you were a family. We hope we didn't make you uncomfortable." "Not at all, Your Grace," Bo replied quickly, though there was a hint of unease in her voice. She turned to Din, her gaze lingering a moment longer than usual. In that look, Din sensed a myriad of emotions: uncertainty, perhaps a longing for something unspoken, and maybe even a hint of apology for the confusion. Truthfully, Din wasn't uncomfortable with others perceiving them as a family. Grogu was undeniably his son, even if the adoption hadn't been made official yet. And Bo had become an integral part of both his and Grogu's lives, fitting in so naturally that it felt like she had always been there. Deep down, Din realized that he wanted her to remain a part of their lives, to be part of his family too. But that desire felt like a distant dream. She was a princess, after all, destined for greatness beyond his simple life. Din believed that Bo was meant for something far grander than being part of his humble clan. It was what she deserved. Thankfully, the arrival of the food provided a timely distraction, drawing the conversation away from the delicate subject. Captain Bombardier and the Duchess continued to shamelessly flirt in front of them, their affection for each other on full display. They exchanged playful banter and loving glances, speaking openly about how much they adored one another. As the couple expressed their feelings with ease, a large part of Din couldn't help but cringe at the overly romantic display being served alongside their meal. Yet, beneath the discomfort, there was also a pang of envy. It was so effortless for them to express their love without hesitation or fear of vulnerability. Din couldn't help but wonder what that must feel like, to be so open, so unguarded with one's emotions. For Din, emotions were something to be guarded, kept close and protected, as if his heart were encased in its own Beskar armor. The weight of that armor often made it difficult for him to express what he truly felt, especially when it came to matters of the heart. The very thing that protected him also kept him distant, isolated from the deeper connections he sometimes longed for. The only time he had truly let his vulnerability take over was when Grogu was about to be separated from him. In that moment, he not only bared his face to Grogu, but also laid his heart bare. It was an act of pure love, one that stripped away all his defenses, all the layers of his armor. But once that moment had passed, Din had retreated back into that armor, both his face and his heart hidden away once more. It was safer that way, he told himself. This was the way, even if a part of him longed for the freedom to be as open as others could so easily be. Yet, as Din glanced again at the royal couple of Plaisir, he couldn't help but wonder if perhaps there was truth in what Omera had once said to him on Sorgan, that a life without the armor, both on his face and around his heart, might actually be nice. When he turned to his side and saw Bo gently reprimanding Grogu to slow down as she offered him more food, the source of these thoughts became clear. Watching her care for Grogu with such natural affection, Din realized why these ideas were taking root in his mind. The image of Bo with Grogu felt so right, so warm, that it made him wonder if a life with fewer barriers might be worth considering. In that moment, he understood that his longing for something more, for a life where he could be as unguarded as those around him, wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was a deep, growing desire. This desire had taken root during his time in the covert, slowly and steadily, and now it had grown too strong to be ignored or cut away. Din knew it was too late to retreat from these feelings, and he had only himself to blame for allowing them to flourish. He had let himself get too close to the fiery red-haired woman who had unknowingly kindled this yearning within him, and now there was no turning back.